Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, we roll back onto the dark stretches of highway, where fog drifts low across the asphalt, and the hum of the wheels hides whispers you're not meant to hear. These are 9 true trucker horror stories, tales collected from deserted fuel stops, empty motels, and miles of open road where time and reality start to fade. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt so you never miss another drive into the strange and the unknown. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road is waiting. Story number 1. The first time Evan noticed the sign, it blinked ahead like it had been waiting for him. Exit 191, 1 mile. The green metal hung in his high beams. A clean promise of coffee and a lit bathroom and maybe a slice of pie if the diner was still awake. He checked the clock on his dash. 2:17. The digits looked colder than usual. The air beyond the windshield was flat and pale. A faint ground fog hovering just above the cracked shoulders of this old stretch of interstate. The reefer hummed steady behind him. Good air on the lettuce. He'd timed this run to slide past the city traffic. He'd planned on this night being easy. Pasture land. Fences. A sky like poured ink. He set the cruise at 58 and let the truck drift through the mild hills. The CB was low, a comfort only. Nothing but a faint hush. The only other voice came from the tires. That endless, persuasive tone that makes thoughts slow down and slide into each other. A signpost flashed. Exit 190. 1 mile. He exhaled. Already? He said softly. But no one heard. He didn't like to talk much on the night roads. But the sound of his own voice felt steadying. He glanced down at the fuel gauge. Plenty. He could wait for the next exit. He could also pull off, pour coffee from the thermos, step into the quiet for a minute, and let the damp air clear his head. A minute later, the same sign blinked into view. Exit 191, 1 mile. He touched the brake, puzzled at first in that mild, soft-edged way a person can be when they're just a little too tired. The white line slid by underneath. In his right mirror, his trailer was a taller shade of darkness, clean and straight. He had not passed an off-ramp. He was sure of that. The radio chose that moment to cough. It wasn't static exactly. It was like a breath caught between stations. Then a small ribbon of sound threaded through it, muted and faint. A voice just behind the wall. He leaned toward it. Copy on 19. Windy one out. You passed them. He reached for the CB and clicked the mic without thinking. Come back? He asked, polite by habit, the way you are with strangers in the night. But the voice was gone. The radio settled into a low wash. No other rigs announcing, no road reports, nothing but the highway breathing. Up ahead, the green sign lifted out of the fog again, crisp and exactly where it had been. Exit 191. 1 mile. Evan was not the kind of driver who spooked easily. He'd hauled in worse. Snow that pressed its face to the windshield and tried to come in. Wind that leaned its full body against the trailer. A summer storm that made lightning skitter across the fields like it was looking for something. He'd slept in the cab during a blackout at a truck stop, while coyotes sang somewhere beyond the fence. He knew the night, but something about the repetition congealed his thoughts. He turned off the cruise and let the rig slow. Gravel sang under the tires as he eased onto the shoulder. He kept it smooth. No sudden moves. He set the brake and listened. Out here, the silence between engines is deeper than a living room silence. It feels like the road is waiting. He didn't like that feeling. He took his thermos, unscrewed the top, and poured coffee into the lid. Steam made a small world between his hands. He opened the door and stepped down into the fog. The air smelled like wet metal and hay. He walked along the length of the trailer, brushing his fingers along the cold side to steady his body in the gray light. The dots on the shoulder hummed beneath his boots. Farther down, past his rear axles, the white posts with their little reflectors stood like a line of patient watchers. He checked his straps, though he didn't need to. Everything was perfect. He checked the reefer temp. It matched the paper. He looked toward the highway and saw nothing but that smooth, unspooling dark, the steady ribbon of painted lines, the horizon a smudge. Somewhere out there, cows shifted in their sleep. By the time he climbed back in, he felt settled enough to laugh at himself. He started the rig, checked his mirrors, signaled out of habit though no headlights moved behind him, and eased back into the lane. The digital clock winked. 2:17. He didn't register it right away. Not until the coffee had warmed his throat and he'd taken the lane's middle, letting the wheels sit under his palms like a living thing. Not until the next green sign lifted cleanly from the fog again. Exit 191, 1 mile. He swallowed. His body stayed calm, but his mind moved sharper. The odometer hadn't budged as much as it should have. The GPS on his phone, he didn't rely on it, but he glanced, showed a thin blue line and nothing else. It did not show any exit. It did not show the next town. The cellular bars sat at 1, then at 0, then back to 1 like they were breathing too. On the left, fields unrolled like a perfect print. On the right, a low shape appeared through the mist. A small sign, hand-painted, pointing down a 2-track gravel road. Shady's Pie. He almost smiled. The arrow pointed into the dark. He heard it then, the sound that wasn't sound, something like pages turning slow. He had not seen the Shady sign before. Now it was there, modest and hopeful, like a secret. He drove on past it. He watched his mirrors. The Shady sign remained in place for longer than it should have, as if the road had slowed around it. Anyone got eyes on 191? A voice rustled across the CB, as old as a vinyl record, as gentle as someone half asleep. Been drifting past it all night. He didn't click the mic. He did not want to be talking to the past. He told himself it was some local with an antique radio. He told himself he was fine. He placed his thumb and forefinger on the bottom of the wheel and breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, the way he'd learned in the early months, when the night seemed to be a thing you had to bargain with. The road persisted. The sign returned. Exit 191, 1 mile. At that moment, he knew he had to change something he could control. He reached up and turned the dash clock off. The little glowing digits vanished. Smart, he told himself. Don't let the number get in your head. He eased the window down an inch. The fog pushed a cool breath into the cab. He cut the radio entirely. Silence came into the truck like a guest. The engine kept its faithful tone. Out of the corner of his eye, a pair of taillights bloomed red far ahead, then winked out as if a truck had dipped down a hill. Relief flickered in him. Another driver. He'll follow a body. He'll break the spell of empty road. He pressed just a little on the throttle, and the rig responded, gathering itself, a smooth pull. He watched the lights reappear. They were closer than they should have been. For a second, he thought he was running up too hot, and hedged his speed, letting the distance open. The taillights didn't belong to a trailer. They were too close together, too narrow, too low. A pickup, maybe a beleaguered farm truck late on a feed run. He shrugged the feeling off and kept his place. The lights drifted right. He recognized the shape now. Not a pickup. A flatbed, long, empty, moving as if someone careful was at the wheel. No banners. No flags. No company paint on the back gate. The cab was older, all soft angles and square glass. He could nearly see the silhouette through the back window of the cab, but the fog made halos around the shapes. He couldn't see the driver's head. Maybe low. Maybe a hat. The flatbed carried nothing, but something about it looked like it was holding a weight anyway. They rode like that for a while, Evan hanging back a proper distance, the flatbed steady as a metronome. It was a good feeling for a few minutes, that companionship of anonymous drivers in the dark. He felt anchored. He stopped thinking about the exit 191 sign. He stopped thinking about 217. He listened to the tires and the wind. They rounded a gentle bend. The flatbed's taillights blinked, just once. He squeezed the steering wheel and loosened his hands immediately, reminding his body to be soft. The flatbed drifted a hair to the shoulder, then back. It looked like a driver shaking off a thought, nothing more. And then the sign appeared again. Exit 191, 1 mile. Evan exhaled through his teeth. The flatbed did not react. It maintained its pace, like a person who had already decided what to ignore. The Shady's Pie arrow lifted out of the fog again too, in the perfect same position as before, pointing down a 2-track that cut away from the interstate and into a stand of low trees. The trees weren't there a mile ago. The trees weren't there on the map. The flatbed's taillights brightened as it brushed its brakes, just a whisper of red, a thought of stopping, and then released. "You passed them," the radio whispered to itself, almost directly in his ear, though the knob was off and the little screen was blank. The sound was not a bark or a shock. It was the voice you use to read someone the end of a letter. He couldn't stop his eyes from going to the right mirror. The faint ghost of his own trailer ran alongside him, a darker rectangle against the lighter dark of the mist. He saw himself dimly, a shape at the wheel. He felt the weight of the cargo, and then he felt another weight, something wider, like the road had become a field that was thinking. He almost laughed at the thought because it had that odd clarity that comes when you're very tired and your brain looks at its own insides and says, "We can make anything now." He needed an exit. He needed something true. He looked for the little nothing details that make a place real. A junked tractor under a beaver-chewed tree. A culvert where water flickered. A billboard whose lights were out all but one upper corner. He watched for bugs in the headlight beam, for the small way they slow when damp. In the corner of his vision, the flatbed stayed steady, patient, as if it could wait all night. The shoulder rumble whispered under his right tires. He corrected. He breathed. His palms were dry. The next time the Shady's arrow came into view, the flatbed blinked once again and drifted toward that gravel mouth. Evan felt a tug in his chest so distinct, he almost put his turn signal on too. He pictured a low building with 3 cars out front, neon blinking, the bell on the door tinkling once when he pushed in, the kind of pie you can taste the sugar on your tongue just to think about it. And he pictured someone kind behind the counter saying, "We've been waiting." He kept straight. The flatbed did not. It eased off onto the 2-track, with the sigh of a vehicle that had done this many times without incident. The red taillights moved into the trees and became 2 faint cherries in fog, then one, then none. The truck felt lighter when it was gone. The road felt emptier but truer, as if the air had cleared. He realized he had been matching the flatbed's rhythm, not his own. He let the speed fall to 55 and let his muscles find a new pace. A sound like a ring came from the dark off to the right. He looked over before he could stop himself. A payphone stood beside a little square building he hadn't seen before. The building wore the style of a time that never really left rural places: block walls, 2 windows, the sort of roof that has no opinion. The payphone hung from a metal bracket with a blue sign above it. The phone was ringing. He was past it before he could think anything except that it had been there. Not a sign he had created. Not an arrow pointing at a diner. A ringing phone. The thought set a clean, bright line in his mind. He signaled, eased to the shoulder, and let the truck coast. He thought, "If I make a choice that is mine, the road can't choose for me." He stepped down, and the night met him, cool and steady. The phone was farther than it had looked from the cab, which was comforting. Distances behaved like they should. He crossed the ditch with a careful foot and stepped up to the payphone. The receiver hung straight down, the black curled cord a tidy spiral. The bell within it rang soft and urgent. He glanced at the building. Through one window, he saw a soda machine with cans behind a plastic front, labels turned to him like faces. He picked up the phone. For a breath, there was only the soft room tone of the world. Then a voice spoke, and it was ordinary in a way that nearly made his knees soften. Not frightening, not a radio trick, just ordinary and familiar enough to pinch the skin at the bridge of his nose. "Don't stop when the road asks you twice," the voice said, calm as a dispatcher. "Don't follow a red light into a place with no signs." The little hair behind his ear prickled in that small, survivable way. "Who is this?" he asked before he could stop himself. He hadn't meant to make it personal. He was aware of how alone he was on the wet grass. "Keep your lane," the voice said gently. "There's fog on the old road tonight." And then the line went perfectly still. He could hear the faintest breath of his own body in the mouthpiece. He did not put it back into the cradle for a moment, unwilling to break the small coffin of peace that stillness had become. He rested it against the metal and let go. When he climbed back into the cab, he didn't turn the radio on. He did not like it silent, but he liked it more than he liked the CB's old-timey voice. The clock was still off. He left it that way. He drove. The exit 191 sign returned once more. It looked identical to every other time. It did not glow any brighter. It did not wave at him. He said out loud to no one, "No." He said it softly, the way you tell a dog to let something go. Then he breathed. He took the lane gently through the center of the fog as if riding the spine of a long gray animal. The shady sign appeared off to the right, and he felt the tug, and he acknowledged it, and he let it pass. He drove a quarter mile, then another. He found himself half waiting for the sign again. He found himself half fearing that it would not reappear, and that he had been wrong to refuse it. He looked for other truths. A dark fence line, a distant blinking tower, a cattle guard's faint click beneath him. He counted to 60 slowly and then to 60 again, the way he'd been taught when he got a little anxious and needed to give his brain something to hold. When the road finally changed under his tires, it did so humbly. The texture shifted from the older, scratchy blacktop to a fresher, muted surface. He would have missed it if he had not been waiting for small differences. A weight eased from his chest. The sky ahead lightened by a shade he wouldn't have named. The fog thinned. A new sign lifted out of it, exit 192. 2 miles. And then he laughed out loud, quiet and relieved. The sound sounded like him. In the right mirror, the blades of fog that had been following the trailer seemed to lag, as if disappointed. He did not let it make a story. He kept driving. At the top of the next shallow rise, lights bloomed a real rest area. The fluorescent glow soft, the low squat building barely visible, a couple of other rigs already parked straight and square like sleeping animals. He felt a tug toward them that was honest. A bathroom, a walk to shake the night out of his legs. He signaled. The click of the relay sounded like a heartbeat. He took the ramp. He pulled into a spot between a white dry van and a tanker and cut the engine. The sudden hush felt like someone had put a warm blanket over the whole world. When he stepped down, the air felt normal. He could hear a truck 2 rows over idling. He could hear the soda machine inside the rest area, building, spinning a can down its arm. He could hear a couple on a bench talking about their route in the low, practical voice of people comparing maps with their minds. He walked inside and washed his hands and watched the water run straight and true. On the way back to his truck, an older woman with silver hair and a jacket studded with little rhinestones at the collar was walking her little dog. The dog sniffed the grass with serious concentration. She looked up and gave him that nod that drivers give each other in these places, half greeting, half oath. "Foggy out," she said. "It was," he said, because it hadn't followed him in here. She looked past him, out toward the highway. "You see that old road cut? The gravel one? Takes you over to where the old highway used to be before they moved it. My brother took it once as a shortcut, and he swore he saw the diner he used to go to in high school. What was that place? Shady's, I think?" She smiled to herself. Of course it's gone now, all that got swallowed up when they widened. But sometimes, when the fog's right, you feel like the old way's still there, asking you to remember. He nodded. He wanted to ask her more, but the dog had made up its mind and tugged on the leash, a practical creature with places to be. The woman followed her dog and waved. "Have a good night," she said. It sounded like a blessing. Back in the cab, he turned his clock back on. It showed 2:39. He took that as a kind of mercy. He stretched, set his thermos in its holder, and leaned his head back against the rest for one long breath. When he opened his eyes, something flashed in the far edge of his mirror. He adjusted the glass and saw it. Out on the highway, just as the rest area exit curved back onto the interstate, a long shape eased past the ramp with a familiar steadiness. It was a flatbed, empty and quiet. Its taillights burned controlled and low as it reached the place where the gravel road slipped away. Without hesitation, it signaled right, a courtesy no one needed but given anyway, and shifted into the dark toward the trees that weren't there. For a second, he wanted to run out and wave his arms, to say don't. But the urge passed like a sudden wind. He watched the lights dim. He watched the red become a distant thought. Then nothing. He turned away and looked through his windshield at the building. The fluorescent lights hummed. The soda machine clicked. The world remained. He felt the truth of his own hands on his knees and let that be the anchor. When he rolled back out onto the highway, he kept his speed modest, and his lane centered, and his mind on the smallness of things he could verify the feel of the wheel, the breath in his chest, the way the engine settled into the long, low note it liked best. A ways down, the sky lightened by a thin degree, and the fog lifted into soft ghosts above the fields, and then thinned into nothing. At dawn, birds took the fence lines and sat like punctuation. He told no one about the payphone. He didn't need to. Some nights the road asks twice. He knew that now. And some nights, you answer yourself. Story number 2. Marisol liked the way the desert felt at night, how the sky opened, and the land laid itself out like a flat, quiet thought. The highway ran straight enough through the high plains that the stars seemed to ride alongside, keeping pace in the side glass. The van behind her was loaded with boxed refrigerators, snug and strapped, nothing tricky. The kind of haul where you breathe easier, knowing your corners and your stopping distance. She'd timed the run to miss the dinner crush at the 2-lane junction and the morning rush at the city. It was the in-between. The hours when the truck and the road made their own agreement. The dash glowed a soft amber. Her pre-pass transponder sat on the windshield like a small, obedient bird. When it chirped green, she barely noticed. When it chirped red, she took it as a suggestion rather than a rebuke. Out here, the way station at mile 289 was the kind you thanked when it was open, well-run, fair, in and out with a nod. Most nights this stretch posted closed, and she sailed past, keeping her speed modest because it felt right to do. There were no towns on this length, only names on a map and fence lines. Yucca stood in the median like candelabras. The air had a clean mineral smell she always associated with night in the high country. Coyotes would be out somewhere but far from the asphalt. The only company was the occasional oncoming set of headlights humming along on the other side, small and bright, and then gone. A sign rose on the right. Way station. 2 miles. Not unusual. The station had a way of advertising itself even when it was asleep. A mile later, a second sign answered. Open. The word was lit with those old square bulbs that made letters look a little kinder. She frowned without tension. It was late. Late enough that the place should have been dark. Her transponder chirped, a sound like a watch beep. Red. She took her foot off the throttle a hair. The road dipped. Ahead, the low shape of the way station sprawled like a ship in harbor. Sodium lights, flat roof, the dark slit of a bay door. Moths did their careful dances in the glow. An arrow sign over the right lane blinked. Scale 2. The left went black, then green, then black again. As if a hand behind the glass was testing the switch. She didn't mind pulling in. Her hours were good. Her schedule had cushion. She took the deceleration lane with the ease of someone who likes living within lines. The van swayed once over the seam where the concrete met asphalt. She eased over the grates and felt the scale platform under her tires like a firm handshake. A speaker on a pole crackled, then popped. "Driver, come to a full stop," a woman's voice said, flat in that official way that suggested neither impatience nor friendliness. "Hold position." Marisol set the brake. The parking brake hissed, familiar and domestic. The station office sat beyond the glass, squared and neat, with a bulletin board on the far wall. No movement inside. She could see a coffee maker's dark outline and a corkboard pinned with paper that had hung long enough to curl. The fluorescent lights hummed like insects. The pre-pass transponder chirped again green, inexplicably, and then went quiet. She held still. The speaker coughed. "Roll forward slowly to the stop line," the same voice said, then softer, like she'd turned away from the mic for a second. "We see you, R. Velasquez." Marisol blinked. She looked at her own plates on the hood. She had not given a name. The company name was on the door, nothing more personal than that. The woman might have meant the truck number. She might have known their fleet. Still, the way the name slid out felt like someone pulling a file unbidden. She rolled forward, a foot at a time. The white paint of the stop line passed beneath her. The speaker crackled. "Stop. Thank you." The bay next door clicked and buzzed as if its lights wanted to wake but thought better of it. A small printer on a stand inside the glass whirred. A strip of paper crept out in mechanical jerks. The building's door did not open. No one crossed the floor to fetch the slip. Instead, a steel drawer in the wall, The kind you'd see at a bank or a pharmacy slid outward with a smooth, steady motion. It stopped halfway between inside and out, waiting. Marisol looked around out of habit before opening the door. The parking lot was empty. A tumbleweed the size of a house cat bumped against a chain-link fence and then lodged there, harmless as a ball. The night air touched her face, dry and cool. She crossed to the drawer and took the paper. It was a weight ticket, crisp and neatly printed. Gross, 79,980. Steer, 11,860. Drive, 33,500. Trailer, 34,620. Legal, tight, but legal, except for the drive. 1,000 pounds over. She looked back at her trailer in the mirror-like black of the window and could picture the pallets exactly as they'd been loaded. She'd checked weights at pickup. She had the math. The numbers in her head and the numbers in her hand had disagreed before, but not by this. Not late at night, with no one in the glass box to tell the scale to fuss. In the corner of the ticket, in the kind of dot matrix font you only see on old slips and nostalgic menus, it read, Station, 289, 3RD shift, date stamped beneath, the 14th of July 2092. She stared at that number. Then she said out loud, Nah, because hearing your own voice sometimes resets the mind. The speaker popped again. Driver, pull to the inspection lane, the voice said. We'll fix your balance. There is a kind of quiet that comes specifically with authority that has no need to hurry. Marisol felt that quiet slide in and sit beside her as if it had paid for a seat. She shrugged the weight in her shoulders into a better place. Copy, she said, though she had not pressed a button or picked up a mic. She climbed back into the cab, eased off the scale, and followed the guiding white line around the building to the left. The sign over the bay read Inspections in chipped black letters. It felt like driving behind a theater bare walls, the backs of electric things, the smell of transformers and exhaust heat. She stopped where the line suggested, set the brake, waited. Inside the office, a clock on the wall held its hands at 1:41. Not ticking. A map of the state hung opposite, highways drawn as thick red veins with coffee stains around the Capitol. A white ceramic mug with blue letters sat by the window. The letters read Roger in a font that belonged on bowling shirts. Not bad, the speaker said. Slide your tandems back one hole. She almost laughed. Tandems. Of course. Always the easiest solution. She'd slid them plenty to balance loads. She pulled the handle. It stuck, with a metallic stubbornness that felt personal. She'd greased the pins last week. She'd bragged about it. Now the lock gave her nothing but the hollow clonk of pride being corrected. She stepped out with gloves on and her flashlight in her teeth, the light feathering the undercarriage with a weak bargain of lumens. The air had stilled to something you could have called a thought. She set her foot nonchalantly, as if pretending at ease would trick the world into ease. She rocked the trailer gently with her shoulder to ease the pressure on the pins and pulled again. The handle moved a fraction, then no more. Stomp your brakes, sweetheart, the speaker said, suddenly almost conversational. Hard and quick. She did not bristle at sweetheart. It came with a tone that made the word sound like a glove handed to you before you did a cold thing. She climbed back up, tapped the brake with a firm, exact motion, felt the weight of the trailer settle differently, and then climbed down. The handle slid free as if it had only needed to believe it could. She pulled the van a foot forward. The pins clacked into the next hole with a sound like a closing book. She re-engaged the lock and found herself smiling before she could stop it. A job that obeyed physics is a comfort. She wiped grease on the rag by the step. The speaker crackled again. That'll do. Come back across scale 2. She did. The truck felt marginally different in the way a familiar chair feels after you move it a foot. She stopped where she was told. The printer in the empty room sang its little song. The drawer slid out, patient. The new ticket read, Gross 79,980. Steer, 11,860. Drive, 32,500. Trailer, 35,620. All tidy, all kind. This time, there was something else in the tray beneath the paper, a photo. not glossy. A little square with a white border. Someone had written 3RD shift on the bottom edge in ballpoint. The picture showed a freight tractor parked right where she was sitting now. An older model, boxy, beautiful in the utilitarian way the 80s sometimes were. The driver's side door was open. There was a man leaning against the tire in a uniform that matched the Muggs era. Patch on sleeve. Unmistakable grin. In. The office window behind him. The clock read 1:41. Marisol glanced up. It still did. The speaker took a breath. She could hear it in the little ambient sound that rides microphones. "You'll want to take it slow over Red Arroyo," the voice said. "Wind finds you there even when there's nothing to throw at." The shoulders soft. Bridge rails hum. Hearts have no reason to speed up at ordinary words, but some do anyway. She had been across Red Arroyo in daylight. The bridge was long and dull, stretched over a slot that had eaten enough water in springs gone by to earn respect. Wind, though. She hadn't thought of wind. The air around the station sat like stacked plates. She looked beyond the lot. The mesquite didn't even tremble. "Thank you," she said, like you say to someone who points out the step you hadn't seen. "Leave the gauge on your right in the green, and keep the semis between the posts." The voice answered, almost a chuckle, and then something softer, a bit like the speaker pressed to clothing. "Keep rolling. Don't stop on glass." "What?" she asked, before she could talk herself out of asking anything. "Don't stop on?" But the speaker settled into a low hum again, the kind of silence that, if it had a face, would be a smile that didn't need to show teeth. She tucked the photo behind the visor. She folded the weight ticket once and slid it into the leather pocket where she kept permits and proof of insurance. It felt lighter than paper should. She glanced once more at the office. Motionless, lights steady. The mug by the window, the white letters on blue, as untroubled as a lake at dawn. On the way out, the arrow over the lane flickered twice, as if it had thought of blinking and then regretted the extra effort. Her transponder chirped. Green this time. One small pip. She merged back onto the highway. The asphalt welcomed her the way a path welcomes someone who keeps to it. She didn't turn the radio on. She liked music, but she liked a voice less in that hour. The engine sang its low syllable. The tires wrote their long sentence under her feet. Yucca and wire fence repeated themselves into comfort. Off to the right, a low draw inhaled what shadow it could hold. Mile 300 came and went, then 301. The bridge over Red Arroyo appeared ahead, a long set of rails and shadows. The kind of structure that looks mild at noon and longer at night. The windsock at the approach lay flat like a sleeping thing. She thought, "I'll ease for respect anyway." She did. Halfway across, the truck shifted left in a way that wasn't her own doing. Not violent, not dramatic. Just a hand she didn't know had been on her shoulder pressed down for a second. The sound the bridge made was a whisper tone, something like bottles in a crate, muffled and humming. The air outside became a rope pulled sideways, surprising in a place that had been peaceful. It came in one breath and then released, as if the ravine had exhaled a secret only once. She kept her wheels dead steady between the posts. The right mirror showed her trailer exactly where it should be close enough to be a reassurance. The left mirror showed the guardrail's clean, pale line. She corrected no more than the width of a finger. The wind pressed again, a sibling gust, then lay down. On the far side, the shoulder crumbled. Not much. A foot of land had sloughed in a way that made the edge look like a cake cut bad. There were scuffs in the dust where someone had put tires where tires didn't want to go. Fresh. Had it rained earlier? Not here. Not tonight. She eased past, and the truck stayed true. She thought of stepping hard on the brakes and laughing, a little, from the release of a tension she had not known she was holding. But she didn't. The words from the speaker graced the back of her mind without needing to turn to face her. Don't stop on glass. She didn't know the phrase. Maybe it meant the bridge. Maybe it meant the gleam of things that seem solid and then aren't. She didn't need to decode it. Some advice is an ornament. Some is a rope you leave tied where it is. 4 miles down, she saw the outline of another way station across the median. The old one. The one the map apps ignored unless you zoomed in. Boarded windows. A chain and padlock on the gate. The open sign dead as a doornail. She could see the ghosts of administrative stickers curling away from the glass. A storm had left sand drifts against the doors, and the footprints in that sand were only animal. Yet for a second, only a second, she had the absurd feeling that if she pulled in, a drawer would slide out and cough up exact numbers in dot matrix type. She drove on. The road rose and fell in mile-long sighs. The stars pivoted with her in that illusion that makes turns out of the earth spin. Pre-pass piped a small green again, reflexive at the bypass detectors. She saw 3 other rigs scattered across the night, 1 tanker, 2 curtain-siders each in their own lit bubble of headlight. At the next truck stop, she pulled in not because she needed fuel, but because she wanted the companionship that comes with fluorescent light and coffee that tastes like windings. The building was a low rectangle with a mural of a hawk on the side. A handwritten sign on the door advertised tamales on Saturdays. The clerk had a familiar polite fatigue and a pen behind his ear. A couple of teenagers in reflective vests restocked shelves with an autonomy that said 3rd week on the job. The world here had no reason to be strange. Marisol poured herself decaf because sleeping felt like something she might want later. By the register, 2 older drivers were playing a pen and napkin version of a card game, swapping stories in that low, rhythmic way people do to keep their tempers even. She caught the tail end of a sentence. They shut that scale down after the washout in '98. Never reopened. They still keep the lights on sometimes, though. Round-robin power saver or something, I heard. The other driver shook his head. My old man used to work there. 3rd shift. Name was Roger. Had a mug with his name on it. The kind of guy who knew to warn you about wind 3 exits before you noticed your trailers sing. He used to say this stretch has an ear for trucks. Always listening. He died in '99. Heart like a stone fence. Now and then you hear his voice when your radio shouldn't have any voice to hear. He chuckled without humor. Or maybe that's just a story the yard tells when it wants to feel watched over. Marisol glanced down at her receipt, like it held anything but numbers, and a neat line reading, "Thank you. R. Velasquez." She had not told them her name. She raised her coffee, and paid, and didn't ask for more than a nod. Back at the counter of condiments, a corkboard held the usual notes. Guitar for sale, small dog in back of blue pickup needs home. Lost hat with patches, tucked into one corner, behind an old clipping about wildfire safety, was a square of paper that had once been white. Someone had written in small, careful letters, "3rd shift keeps you honest. Don't stop on glass." She left the note where it was. She did, however, dig into the visor for the photo and look at it again. A younger man in a uniform from a different run of fabric, leaning, grinning, an office window behind him where a clock never moved. He looked like the kind of person who knew when to say sweetheart in a way that felt like a favor rather than a claim. On her way back to the parking lot, she caught herself counting the boards on the closed station's windows as if she were close enough to see them from here. The thought made her laugh. The night makes maps inside the head. She shook it off and climbed back into the cab. She drove the rest of the night with an attentiveness that felt like kindness. The pre-pass had nothing more to say. The CB stayed quiet. The road moved under her with its own large patience. In the dark, just before dawn, she passed the exit for a town that shared a name with a bird. In the same breath, a gust plucked at the trailer and let go. She let herself think thank you without attaching it to anyone. In the morning, when the sky had the color of a tin bowl and the land had put its dust mask back on, she stopped at a rest area to stretch. The building had a low roof and a row of vending machines that offered the usual choices. A bulletin board inside listed an event that had already happened. A maintenance worker in a bright vest swept sand into a pan with a gentleness that suggested someone who had learned not to fight the endlessness of sand. She took the weight ticket out of her pocket and looked at the date again. The 14th of July 2092. She flipped it over, thinking perhaps there would be a note to explain the misprint. There wasn't. Only the faint impression of the letters on the front where the printer had knocked into the paper. She held it up to the light. The watermark read exactly what it should. The brand of blank forms the state had used when forms had brands you recognized. She put the ticket back, where it would live for a while, folded once, behind the permit pages. She left the photo tucked in the visor with the other small talismans drivers collect without meaning to a diner punch card, a guitar pick a nephew had given her for luck, an old toll receipt that proved nothing but felt good to touch. She thought, I'll take the bypass if I can. I'll pull in if they say to. I'll listen if the voice is kind. The miles. Ahead promised normal things. Breakfast at a chain where the pancakes always tasted like the idea of pancakes. A radio show that tried to be funny. A sunrise that put pennies into the sage and made the road look newly minted. She took them. She let her shoulders drop. She drove through the edge of morning and let the world open. That afternoon, when she delivered at a warehouse with a loud bay door and a quiet clerk, the man at the desk clicked his pen twice and said, "You made good time." He looked at her paperwork like paperwork could tell him if she was good at this. He stamped things at the places where stamps go. She left the cooled air of the office for the hot breath of the dock and the smell of cardboard. As she climbed back into the cab to check her mirrors one more time, a small sound came from the pre-pass, one tiny, solitary chirp. It was green. There was no way station within 200 miles. She touched the device with one finger, the way you pat a dog who's woken from a good dream. She drives that route once a month now, a habit that carried on without asking anyone for permission. Sometimes, the station at mile 289 is lit. Sometimes it is not. When the open sign glows, she finds the lot clean and indifferent, run by new people in new uniforms, who talk about tire tread depth and laugh at jokes that will never be written down. When the lights are dead, the place reverts to a shape against the sage, and the idea of a place where a drawer could slide open if the night decided to be helpful. She never stops on glass. She doesn't need to know exactly what that means to obey it. She keeps the right gauge in the green. She listens for rails that hum, and tucked where the sun visor meets its clip, held in place by habit and an old rubber band, there's a photo she never shows, of a man who might have once stood in a building where clocks didn't have to move to matter. Sometimes, when the road is a long straight rule, she says thank you out loud into the cab, the way a person talks to themselves when they believe someone is listening and don't require proof. Story number 3. Riley didn't mind humidity if it came with a view. The long causeway across the bay gave both an excess wet air that sheened the windshield even at night, and a black sheet of water that seemed to float the road rather than sit under it. Out here, the highway rose only a few feet above the tide, stretched on concrete segments with joints that thumped beneath the tires at an even interval. The world pared down to simple things: amber lamps every 100 yards, white paint, gray rail, a faint halo over distant shipyards where cranes stood like sleeping birds. The reefer behind him hummed in a steady, reasonable way. The load was light-sealed dairy, nothing dramatic. He had a rhythm that kept him polite with the night. 2 hands on the wheel, radio low on an AM weather loop, windows up enough to keep the cab dry. Vents pointed at the glass to chase fog. The onboard clock ticked past 3:11 and into the part of morning that feels private, like sitting in a kitchen while the rest of the house dreams. He took the causeway at an even 55. Signs at the approach had urged caution, wind gusts possible, slick deck. The flags on the poles barely stirred. Pelicans sat hunched on pilings like folded coats. On the other side of the bay, the soft glow of industrial lights made an artificial dawn over stacked containers. Riley kept his lane snug between reflectors and thought about coffee. The first odd thing was so small he might have missed it. In the passenger side mirror, a vertical shape kept pace with the truck just inside the shoulder line. He assumed it was one of the mile marker posts. They rose politely every 1/10 of a mile, slender and reflective, printing numbers to make the dark measurable. But the shape in his mirror didn't pass backward the way miles do. It came, held, slipped, returned, like a person walking at a steady pace just at the edge of sight. He glanced to the right through the glass. Nothing unusual. Water, rail, dark. A gull cried once, as if remembering something. The AM loop broke, and a quiet voice came in, softer than it had any right to be this far out on the bay. Bridge maintenance advisory, it said. Expansion joints slick between markers 28 and 30. Use caution. Shoulder closed. Then the voice went away, and the loop returned to talking about tides and barge traffic and an incoming front that would approach overnight. Riley's eyes cut to the mile marker as it rose. 27. The advisory had named numbers ahead of him. He told himself he'd go easy. He was not a driver who bragged about daring. He'd been out long enough to know that the road likes people who kneel a little when they walk on it. The vertical shape returned in the mirror, closer to the rail now, a suggestion more than a body. If asked later what he'd seen, he would have shrugged and said, A trick of sodium light and rain film. Still, the human brain doesn't always listen to the part that knows better. It sees a person where a person could be and adopts the caution that goes with that. Riley let off the throttle a hair and checked his mirrors for anyone behind who'd be insulted by his care. No one. At marker 28, the deck made a different sound. Not louder, not broken. Just a tone changed the way a floorboard in a familiar house has one complaint no other board makes. He held the wheel gently. The concrete joints thudded under him 1 to 2, 1 to 2, their rhythm catching up with his pulse. The shoulder looked the same as every other shoulder, narrow, mean, the kind of strip you promised yourself you'd never stop on unless the world insisted. Then he saw them, 3 reflective triangles in the pull-off ahead, placed with the care of someone who wanted to be correct even when no one was there to inspect. The first sat 30 paces back, the second closer, the third at the edge of the lane as if to murmur, "Slow now. Slow like manners." He eased down to 40 and put his hazards on because we inherit the ways that feel right and repeat them without drama. He scanned for a stalled car, a pickup with a trailer, anything to attach the triangles to. The pull-off was empty, no vehicle, no people. Just those 3 neat pieces of red geometry glinting softly in the moist air. He swallowed without thinking. He did not want to stop. He also did not want to pass a warning and pretend he hadn't seen it. The radio hissed. Not a frightening sound, just the kind of static that makes you think of sweaters and dry rooms. Then the AM loop stuttered, and a faraway click sounded in the speaker like someone lifting a receiver from a cradle. "Call box 7, a different voice said, as if reciting to the tape. "Out of service. Use alternate." Then silence again. The loop resumed its tide heights and barge names. Riley frowned because he hadn't seen call boxes on this bridge since he was a kid in the back seat, long before cell towers sprouted along the interchanges. He had a dim memory of yellow posts with phones that smelled like coins. He glanced across the lanes to the median. Nothing but a low barrier and a shadow beyond it where the opposite deck ran back the way he'd come. The reflective triangles waited with the patience of tools. He took the pull-off as deep as his trailer would allow and stopped. In the mirror, the vertical shape paused too, 10 yards behind, an impression tied to a seam where one concrete panel met the next. The hair at his nape lifted not fear exactly, but a body's quiet request for clarity. He set the brake. The truck sighed. He reached for his vest and gloves, because visibility is a kind of language. Out on the deck, the humidity walked into his lungs like a neighbor. The smell of the bay had a clean mud to it. Water clucked and tapped at the pilings far below in a rhythm as old as patience. The triangles were new, still had a grit on their feet like factory dust. He crouched to reset the nearest one in case someone else needed it more precise. As his hand touched the plastic, footsteps whispered on the other side of the rail. He straightened. Slow. The sound moved 3 paces and stopped. Not hurried, not hiding, just pacing. He said, "You all right?" in a voice pitched to that neutral kindness highway people use with strangers on dark shoulders. Wind skated off the water and found his wrists. A barge horn murmured from far off in the channel, the sound gentle and patient the way big things are when they are sure of themselves. Beyond the rail, the world was a flat, breathless dark. No answer came. Riley listened. The footsteps began again. That exact 3-pace rhythm. Then pause. 3. Pause. As if someone were checking seams or counting something with their body. He had a picture in his mind of a maintenance worker with a light on a headband, wearing the orange that every bridge makes mandatory, walking the edge because edges need someone. But his flashlight beam showed wet rail, damp concrete, a drop, nothing else. He set the triangles in a more conservative line and told himself he would move on. As he returned to the cab, a soft ping sounded from the dash. Not a warning. Just the little alert his phone made when service bars came and went. The screen had lit on its own in the cup holder. A notification pulsed. Unknown number. Missed call. The timestamp. 3:17. He hadn't heard it ring. He slid back behind the wheel and watched his side. Mirror for a breath. The vertical suggestion of a person was further back now, near marker 28. He put the truck in gear and rolled out. Hazards off. His night eyes settling again to the lane. the triangles glowed in his mirror like small planets. He felt a tug to go 55, but gave himself 45 until he passed the advisory zone. Sometimes the right speed looks like timidity from the inside. He accepted that. Between 28 and 30, the deck did its tonal shift again, and the wheel tiny shivered the way it does when surface is smoother than it seems. In the right-hand mirror, the maybe person kept exact pace without losing ground or gaining it. It occurred to him to try the CB, useless long before in these parts. He clicked on channel 19 and said, "Anybody westbound over the bay? You got eyes on a pedestrian on the shoulder?" His voice sounded too loud in the cab. The radio rewarded him with a wash of quiet. At marker 30, the feel under the tires changed back. The invisible pressure in his chest released a notch. He took a breath like someone who has crawled under a fence without catching their jacket. He nudged the speed back up. The AM loop mentioned sunrise at 6:12. The vertical shape in his mirror fell away the way shapes do when they find a place to stay. At the far end of the causeway, a service plaza sat in the median. Clean, lit, a little world of fluorescent mercy. He pulled in on principle. The lot wasn't empty. A tanker idled with its driver reclined behind the wheel, ball cap over eyes. A sedan with a roof box had a family stretched like cats in half-sleep positions. A maintenance pickup with a magnetic light bar sat near the entrance to the building, 2 vests draped in the open bed, a broom propped against the tailgate, as if someone had meant to lean on it and remembered something else first. Inside, the air conditioning did that trick where it convinces the sweat on your neck to stop existing. The walls had a mural of shorebirds, painted in the palette of municipal optimism. A rack held free maps and a folded brochure about the estuary's importance. Riley bought coffee and stood a respectful distance from a man in an orange vest whose name tag read Henry in black block letters. Henry was talking quietly to a woman in a visor about restrooms. The tone was not urgent. When Henry finished and turned, Riley lifted his coffee in greeting and found his voice. "Hey, you're the maintenance crew on the bridge tonight?" Henry smiled, the friendly, tired smile of someone whose jobs take longer than explanations. "Half of it," he said. "The rest got pushed to next week." His accent held the coast inside it, light and workable. "Between 28 and 30, Riley said. "Do you have anyone walking the shoulder?" "I saw a shape. Kept pace like a walker. Didn't want to pass by if someone was out there trying to fix something with no truck." Henry's eyes shifted to the side like he was checking a mental list pinned to a wall. "No walkers tonight," he said. "We do the expansion checks with a team, and that was earlier. Call boxes are gone. Cameras are old, but they mean well." He sipped from his own cup. "You saw our triangles?" Riley nodded. "In the pull-off. No vehicle. We set those earlier for a slick seam," Henry said, as if quoting a manual he could recite from memory. "Concrete shifts with the weather and gets a mind. We warn, and then we reset after." He gave Riley a look that was flatter than a joke, but not humorless. "Breeze puts ghosts on the glass out there. Sodium light plays tricks. You keep your focus, you'll be fine." "I got a missed call," Riley said before deciding whether he wanted to sound like someone who'd mention it. "Unknown number." Around the same time, Henry's mouth did a small thing that suggested both recognition and the refusal to make a story bigger than it needed to be. "Those old help phones used to auto-dial dispatch," he said. "Sometimes the line hiccups when the humidity sticks to the copper. You get a call. It's just the infrastructure remembering itself." He tapped the counter with a knuckle, in a companionable way, as if to say, "It's your turn." Outside, the plaza light made the night look gentler than it was. Riley carried his coffee to the truck and sat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the way the building hummed. He could drive on and let the causeway be a line he'd crossed. Or he could go back and satisfy the part of his mind that prefers things closed as neatly as triangles in a row. He found himself signaling, easing back toward the ramp that would take him east again, back across the bay, across the same stretch where the advisory had placed its attention. Westbound lanes looked different from eastbound lanes the way a face looks different from its reflection. He felt the little strangeness of reversing time, of naming numbers backward. 32, 31, 30. The AM loop fell quiet for a long breath, and then spoke again. Same calm voice with the same content, as if time were a cassette you could flip. "Expansion joints. slick between markers, 28 and 30. He eased into the breakdown bay just after 30 and set his hazards. No triangles. The pull-off was clean, as if someone had collected them in a tidy way and moved on. When he stepped down, the air had cooled a half a degree and softened, as if the bay had exhaled into his shirt. He walked to the rail. Beyond it, darkness arranged itself with the patience of water. He said, "Hello?" Not to the night, but to whoever the night might be holding. The sound that came back wasn't a voice at first. It was a click, a small mechanical acknowledgement like the beginning of a connection. His phone lit in his pocket. Unknown number. He put it to his ear in that automatic motion we've all learned. He said nothing. He listened. "Don't put weight on the seam," a voice said, present. Businesslike, no theater to it. Not a warning bark, not a whisper. "Keep left of the joint. One panel slick. Step lines right when wind's wrong. Don't stop out here more than you have." Riley's mouth tasted like copper briefly, as if his own body had become part of the line. "Copy," he said, because habit is steadying. "Who am I talking to?" But the call had already become pure quiet, the kind with a small living breath inside it, and then the kind with no breath at all. He looked at the screen. The call had ended. The log had nothing on it. He wasn't surprised to see that. He was also not comforted by the predictability with which the world refused to prove itself. He returned to the cab and rolled forward at a school zone kind of speed. Between 29 and 28, he could see what the voice had meant even if he couldn't have named it with words before. The seam where two panels met looked lucid. That was the word his mind offered. Lucid in the way a soap bubble looks when a piece of it goes thinner. The paint line slid over the seam and then wobbled a hair, where a machine had followed a path that wasn't quite itself. The rail at that spot had a faded scrape. Not recent. The kind you see 100 places and forget. He kept a tire width to the left. The truck agreed with the choice by not disagreeing. The wheel stayed quiet. The reefer hummed. In the mirror, the shape that had paced him earlier appeared at the spot where the seam was lucid. It looked like someone standing with arms folded, watching traffic go, a neutral presence that neither asked nor offered. Riley felt an urge to lift a hand in acknowledgement and did, just 2 inches off the wheel, both palms returning to where they belonged immediately after. The shape didn't change, not because it was indifferent, but because maybe it had no need to. By the time he crossed back to the mainland side again, the east had thought about light but decided not to begin. He re-entered the westbound flow and let the causeway become history twice. The triangles were gone for good. The AM loop got bored of the bay and spoke instead of fog inland. He turned the volume down and let the sound of tires hold the room. At the next fuel stop, he filled what needed filling and scrubbed the windshield with the squeegee in slow, confident rows. Another driver, an older man with hands like paper maps, nodded to him over the pump and said, "You do the bridge?" Riley nodded back. The man grunted. "Walker's out there sometimes," he said. "Makes you swear you've seen a person when it's just a bad angle and an old habit in concrete." He pulled his cap brim down a notch, as if that helped with reflection. "Keep your head on your line, you're fine." Riley thought of saying the part about the call, but didn't. It felt like telling someone a magic trick he didn't understand. He checked his tires. The right side had a thin, chalk-white kiss of paint on the outer edge, where the brush of a line had been too generous. He wiped it with a rag. It smeared. Faint. Proof. Or nothing. He left it. He delivered into a warehouse where the air tasted like cardboard in a clean way, and the dock workers moved with the practiced, quiet choreography of people who have learned how to be fast without speed. A woman with a lanyard clipped him out and said, "We like you coastal drivers. You show up on time." He smiled with the top half of his face and signed where she told him to. The world, during daylight, arranged itself into forms that didn't ask him to be the only witness. That night, on the return trip, the bay lay darker, as if the clouds had tucked themselves under the stars like blankets. He took the causeway again, slower by a choice that looked like courtesy if you didn't know the reason. Between 28 and 30, he saw a vest on the rail, one of the high-vis mesh ones like the ones in the maintenance pickup, the reflective strips catching headlight and sending it back in quiet punctuation. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. He raised 2 fingers off the wheel again in a hello that didn't ask for reply. In his passenger mirror for a second, he thought he saw a person wearing it, turned toward the water not in sorrow or fear, but as if they were listening to something only they were qualified to hear. The figure lifted a hand in a normal wave. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Riley nodded once more and kept moving. The road likes you better when you keep moving. A day later, at a different plaza with a different mural and a different Henry, a bulletin board near the coffee machines had a strip of paper thumbtacked among advertisements for yard sales and a flyer about a lost parrot. The strip read simply, Bridge Advisory 28, 30 Mind the Seam. Someone had drawn a small triangle next to it, a neat little piece of geometry in ballpoint ink. No ghost story, no sermon. Just a note the way people leave notes for each other when they share space with a long thing that sometimes misremembers where it ends. He kept that stretch in his mind, not as a place to be afraid of, but as a place to be the person who does what's asked. He did not talk about it much. He did not need to. Nights layered over nights, and the causeway went on doing what causeways do, bearing cars and trucks and worries and small private courage. Sometimes, when his AM radio slid off the weather loop and whispered something useful in a voice that had no business being nearby, he thanked it the way one thanks a handrail. On the shelf above his windshield, he kept a new set of triangles. They stayed folded, straps tidy, their surfaces unscuffed for a long time. Every so often, he glanced at them the way a person checks a spare key in a drawer. He liked knowing where they were. He liked the quiet idea that, if needed, someone would set them just so for him, and he would set them just so for someone else. And a sequence of red shapes might be the difference between a disturbance and an event. On certain muggy nights, when the bay turned its breath back toward the land, and the lamps haloed all the way down to the water, a vertical suggestion kept pace in his mirror. He allowed it its place. He did not seek it. He did not deny it. He kept his hands at 10 and 2, and remembered that even when the night insists on being strange, the white paint always means what it says. Story number 4. Sloane had driven prairie and seaboard, but the mountains were the only places that made her sit up straighter. The air at elevation always felt carefully measured, like a song played softly, so nobody else woke up. In the dark above Summit Glen, the grade fell away in a series of switchbacks and long, serious straights that didn't care what the map looked like. Pines clung to the slopes, their needles drinking moonlight, the trunks standing like a congregation that preferred silence. Her load was clean and heavy rolls of paper strapped and tucked, and the tractor was one she trusted. She'd stopped at the brake check area on the crest, as the sign asked, and stepped out into the hush to put her hands on what mattered, dust on the shoulders of the tires. Hose is good, pins through. She pulled a breath that tasted like sap and cold metal, and let it out slow. 10 miles of 7%. Every school in the mountains taught the same lesson, low gear before the hill. She did the math, eased the stick into the gear that felt like respect, and set the engine brake on medium. The night was still enough to hear a creek spill somewhere far below like a ribbon unwinding. The first mile slid by without complaint. Guardrails flashed in the corners of her vision, posts with reflectors leaning like attentive faces. She kept it slow enough that her mind could sit in every second. The road had a hum under it, a note that matched the rumble of the frame and made the cab feel like it belonged. The cab-over days were behind her. The long nose out front ate up distance with a calm patience. She thought of her granddad's stories about crossing these same ridges in a truck that rattled like a drawer of wrenches and smiled into the dark. At the second curve, the engine brake light blinked once and steadied. She didn't like that. It blinked again. A flicker, brief, like a tired eyelid. She touched the switch gently, off and back to medium, keeping her right foot feathered. The rig took the slope with dignity. She felt the weight on the drive settle deeper, and she brought the speed down a breath more. Signs rose out of the night like careful advice. Trucks, stay 25. Next, 8 miles. Use lower gear. Run away. Ramp, 3 miles. A wooden board with painted numbers counted the feet to the next hairpin. 500, 400, 300. A ritual someone had set in place a long time ago, so drivers who paid attention felt less alone. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and the road tightened. Sloane leaned into the curve with nothing but fingertips on the wheel, chin lifting to keep her eyes where the white paint whispered. Then she heard it, the sound of a compression brake that wasn't hers. Not loud, not showy, just a low, companionable thrum that tucked itself under the tonality of the night, like a bass player in the next room. The hair on her arms prickled and then laid down, more in recognition than fear. She checked her mirrors automatically. Nothing but her own fenders and the long, obedient rectangle of the trailer. No amber lights coming down behind her, no grille tucked too close. Only the suggestion of clearance lights far above on another switchback, too high and too slow to be that sound. She toggled her engine brake again. The light stayed steady this time, but the extra thrum continued, gently present. She matched it without deciding to, letting her downshift a half beat earlier than her habit, letting her right foot rest easier, letting the gear hold do the old-fashioned work. The truck felt grateful for the choice. The grade bent into a long S, the kind you can feel in your stomach. On the outside of the curve, a small pull-off appeared, and under the first pine at its edge stood a bell mounted on a post. She'd never seen it before. Bronze, maybe, or a metal that wanted to be bronze when it grew up, with a rope hanging from the clapper. A sign beneath it read, in tidy engraved letters, "For everyone who keeps it in gear." The bell didn't ring. The rope didn't sway. They simply existed, and the sight of them settled something in the middle of her chest. Past the bell, the road opened onto a long straight where the mountain relaxed enough to let the world spread out. In the distance far ahead, she saw a line of 3 amber points and a set of red taillights working their way through a higher curve. They moved with the contemplative pace of somebody who had made peace with the grade. She liked the way their rhythm set an example. She did not intend to catch them. It was enough to know they were there. A sign on the right stuttered through her lights. Jake Brake prohibited Town of Summit Glen night hours. She grimaced without unkindness. Nobody who'd chosen to live under a mountain wanted their sleep torn by a truck's bark. But up here above town, the noise was a different animal. A controlled conversation between machine and gravity. She dialed down from medium to low, letting the gear do most of the talk, and the other thrum, wherever it lived, held a steady, reassuring tone. It sounded like experience. The next hairpin demanded her full attention. Rock wall on the inside, nothing but air and treetops on the outside where the guardrail drew a thin white line between sense and regret. The sign that counted the feet returned. She let speed bleed away completely, almost to a roll, and snuck the front wheels into the curve so the trailer would follow. The tires made a soft, compliant sound. Halfway through, from up and left, a very small bell rang. Just once. A single, neat note. Not the bell on the post too far behind and too still. This one sounded like it had been hung in the air for a single purpose. And that purpose had been satisfied in the space of a second. "Okay," she said softly, more to the wheel than to herself. The truck bent, straightened, and took the next 100 yards like a polite dance partner. She checked her dials. The brake air was where it should be. The temps were content. The engine brake light did not blink again. On the shoulder, 2 cones guarded the mouth of the runaway ramp, their reflective bands bright. A sign tilted over it. Closed for maintenance. Use lower gears. She eyed the gravel, heavy and pale under moonlight, and felt an old, small quiver in her calves. It was not drama. It was anatomy. Nobody liked to see the exit out of service. She nodded once, as if to concede, "Then we will not need it." The other thrum was with her, patient as weather. Half a mile later, her radio hissed. She hadn't touched the CB since the crest, no need for chatter on a grade. The hiss shaped itself into words made of cotton. Westbound, bus on the shoulder past mile 60, 2 school logo, all fine, hazards on. Then the sound drained back into the hum of the cab. It had the tone of the volunteer net you hear during long storms. Kind voices over weak signals letting each other know they were in the world. She glanced at the dash clock. Its digits read 2:43, and from the way they looked, they could have just as easily read 1979. Sloan rounded a bend and saw the bus. Not bright yellow, but a faded, nostalgic shade, pulled tidy into the edge, triangles set with care a ways back, a note pinned under the windshield wiper that flapped once and then lay flat. No passengers, no one waving. She passed with the sort of attention you give to a sleeping animal, watchful, quiet, ready to help if help made sense. Her mirrors showed the bus receding until the curve took it away. The thrum behind her shoulder went quiet, as if the companion had paused to look too, and then returned. She checked the gear once more by feel, nudged the wheel against the small impatience of a gust, and let the mountains tell her what to do. There were places on the grade where the stone had been cut back and white lines had been painted across the face in thick diagonal slashes. Old scars. At one of those, something changed in the rhythm that her hands and knees registered before her brain did. It was tiny, that change. A breath held, then released. She took another gear, a little earlier than she would have, and the truck's grateful sound told her she'd caught something that wanted catching. At the bottom of the next long straight, there was a turnout with a small building. She'd stopped there once in daylight. The sign over the door said, "Check brakes," and the inside had smelled like coffee and paper and the memory of raincoats. Tonight, the building's windows shone a weak, hospitable light. She did not intend to stop. Her temps were good, and the night liked her pace. But as she passed, she could see inside just enough to make out a corkboard. On it, a chalkboard hung like a sensible cousin. Words were scrawled there in a hand that leaned to the right. Low gear before slope. If brakes feel proud, humble them. Underneath, someone had added a line in smaller letters. S. Bellman. She didn't know the name, but the thrum seemed to lean into syllables it recognized. She almost laughed. The inside of the building was empty. The clock on the wall read 2:43. She did not need it to change. Farther down, a curve opened briefly to a pullout that wasn't on the map. It was a slip of widened shoulder, carved into the earth like an afterthought. A pickup sat there under a tree that didn't belong high on a ridge broad leaves, a shade tree transplanted from a yard. The pickup's hood was up. A figure stood with hands in pockets, posture relaxed, looking not at the engine but at the road with the detached interest of someone who had been waiting a long time and had learned to enjoy the view. As Sloane approached, the figure lifted a hand to shoulder height. Not a wave exactly, more a salute to the craft of staying upright on a steep and midnight road. She couldn't see a face. She didn't need to. Between mile 60 and mile 59, the grade shifted from stern to almost kind. Pines gave way to a seam of aspen whose leaves were dry and tight and made a tiny applause under the small wind that lived only in these trees. The town slept below, its few streetlights throwing circles on corners where dogs would later sniff and kids would later ride bikes in loops. A sign warned of a low-gear ordinance and a noise ordinance, and then thanked her for visiting in a way that hoped she'd spend money and then leave gently. Sloane clicked her engine brake down to low and then off before the sign asked. She let the gear hold her hand across the last little slope. The thrum eased away like a thought at the edge of sleep. For a fragile second, she felt it move alongside, just outside the passenger glass, a presence that had never been in the cab and had no need to be, something that lived in the combination of stone and steel and nighttime. She whispered thanks to the space in front of her, a syllable so small it was more breath than voice. She took the curve around the town and slowed to a neighborhood pace. Houses tucked themselves under pines. A porch light came on somewhere, as if a person inside had remembered a chore. She rolled past without making noise. At the far edge of Summit Glen, the road leveled like a long exhale and widened into that wide-shouldered generosity of the valley floor. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The world changed key. At the first fuel stop, a station with a rusty sign that showed a bear fishing in a river, she pulled in not for diesel, but for a stretch and a cup. The air by the pumps smelled like cold rubber and clean wind. Inside, the man at the counter had a book open and a cat asleep on the magazine rack, a local animal who had claimed the place with the confidence of someone owed rent and never asked to pay. "You come down the west grade?" the man asked, signing a receipt with a pen on a chain. "Sure did," Sloane said. He nodded at the window, at the darkness that held the mountain beyond the glass. "Bells'll tell you what kind of night it is," he said. "They hung a bell up there after. Sometimes it rings when there's nobody near it. Used to be an old wrecker named Bellman sat up at the brake shed all night long in a plaid jacket, writing poems on a chalkboard about gears and cents. My granddad swore he could hear a truck's voice when there wasn't one, that he'd answer it with that old wrecker's engine talking back. If you go slow like you're supposed to, sometimes you hear him play along." He shrugged, embarrassed at his own affection for the story. "Or, it's just wind." Sloane smiled, not at him but at the shape of the truth that lived under his story. "I kept it in gear," she said. "Good," he said simply. The cat yawned without sitting up. On her way out, A corkboard by the restroom had all the usual community artifacts: lost gloves, piano lessons, a flyer for a pancake breakfast at the volunteer fire hall. Pinned near the bottom, a faded photo showed a cab-over wrecker in front of the brake check building, the mountains sharp behind it. A man in a jacket leaned one hip on the bumper, arms folded, expression halfway between stern and amused. The caption in pen read, S. Bellman, 3rd shift, 1988. Someone had drawn a tiny, neat bell next to the name. Back on the highway, the valley gave her long, forgiving miles. She kept the speed sensible out of respect for habits that had just kept her safe. Locals pulled onto the road with the impatience of people at home in a place. She gave them room. For a while, her mind was quiet. Then, far behind her, from a distance that made no sense, she heard a compression brake take a breath and let it go a single distant syllable. The kind of sound that could have been a truck, a county away, or a weather trick, or something older catching up to say, "That was good work." She kept her hands light on the wheel and let her exhale answer it. Later, at a rest area tucked under cottonwoods, she parked in line with 3 other rigs and settled. The night had its ordinary noises: doors opening and closing softly, an air dryer purging with a polite PST, a laugh from a phone call in a sleeper, brief and real. Sloane wrote in her log and watched the steam from her mug pretend to be weather at the window. On the bench near the vending machines, 2 young drivers shared a granola bar and swapped directions in the fast, earnest way of people new enough to the job to still like the way maps and voices align. "You ever take the West grade?" one asked. "Tomorrow," the other said. "First time. Low gear before?" Sloane said without turning, and offered chorus to a song everyone should know. "Copy," one of them said politely, smiling toward the voice. And then their conversation resumed its easy rhythm. She took off her boots and stacked them neatly. The air smelled faintly of pine. Even here, a bell rang far off once, so lightly that it could have been wind making music, and then the world settled into the long, even breath of sleeping trucks. In the morning, she rose before the sun and found frost on the mirrors like writing she didn't need to read. The mountains stood in silhouette, humble and enormous at once. She ran gloved fingers over the handrail and felt the metal cold and honest. When she rolled back onto the highway, the day put color back into the pines and laid a thin quilt of gold over the low meadows. She didn't look in the mirror for company. She didn't need to. She carried the grade inside her like muscle memory, and the advice remained without having to be spoken. By the time she made her delivery, the story had already turned sideways in her mind into something that didn't require being told. She stacked her straps respectfully in the box and watched a forklift ballet unfold with 2 workers who had developed their own silent language. The world, in daylight, had nothing to prove. Every few months, the route takes her back over Summit Glen. Sometimes there's fresh paint on the guardrails where some stray stone has left a mark. Sometimes there's a new flyer on the corkboard about a dinner served family style at the firehouse to raise money for better tires on the brush truck. Always there is the bell on its post, and the rope that doesn't move, and the grade that asks for humility and gives back a road. When the sign reminds her that noise in town keeps people awake, she turns the engine brake off because it's the right thing. And, just for a moment on the way down, she hears another one low, steady keeping tempo beside her, as if the mountain still likes to harmonize with somebody who understands the song. Story number 5. Kaya preferred the big skies to the big cities. On nights like this, the plains pressed themselves flat and obliging against the horizon, and a person could see a weather front consider itself from 50 miles away. Her cab clock nudged past 2, and the highway unspooled in a ribbon that asked nothing and offered room. The tanker behind her food-grade oil rode like a polite guest most of the time, and a restless one the rest, the liquid whispering forward at red lights and settling back like a row of sleepers turning in their bunks. Tonight, with the wind absent and the air cool, the slosh was mild. She ran easy. The first rest area after the state line was a modest affair, a loop of asphalt folded around a square building, 2 rows of angled truck spots, a pair of map boards that still pretended zinc silhouettes of old explorers were relevant. Sodium lamps made ovals on the pavement. A row of cottonwoods stood at the fence like thin-armed ushers. No town glow reached this far out. She signaled, let the tanker's mass suggest where her braking should end, and eased into a spot between a day cab with curtains drawn tight and a long-nosed sleeper with a sun-faded company logo. Kaya liked to park near the edge where one side of the truck could look out into grass. She set the brake and listened to the hiss like a door closing with manners. Far across the lot, a handful of reefers held a low, constant tone. Somewhere, a small generator thrummed in an APU. A porch light on the building drew a sphere of moths into its uncomplicated orbit. The sign near the entrance read, "Welcome to Sand Creek Wayside. No. Overnight camping 8-hour limit courtesy patrols nightly." Below, someone had tacked a smaller card. "Patrols currently suspended. Thank you for your patience." She did her little rituals. Curtains closed just enough to turn the cab into a room without making it a cave. Window cracked a finger's width. Bunk heater on low. Shoes placed heel to toe where her feet would find them if the night asked. Phone to airplane mode, so her sleep wouldn't be mistaken for a voicemail inbox. She wrote a quick note in the log, sipped water, and let her shoulders tell the mattress they existed. The stillness at planes' rest areas has a particular flavor. It isn't silence. It's a hush woven of small obligations going about their business. Tires tick as they cool. The last of the hot air lifts out of engine bays. Somewhere, a bird not designed for night makes a single half-hearted comment and reconsiders. Kaya let her mind settle into that fabric and was halfway to the soft, dim room where people keep the better memories when something touched the driver's door with a finger. It wasn't a pound or a scrape. It was exactly what a courteous knock sounds like when the person delivering it would rather not bother you if you're asleep. 3 soft taps. Not tentative, not urgent, present, and then gone. She sat up without thinking. It's a reflex learned across years. One ear to the world, even when the body has surrendered. The clock read 2. 36 inches, small green digits. She looked in the mirror on the door, expecting to catch a high-vis vest or the shape of a flashlight moving off. Nothing. Only the slow, faint spin of moths. The ovals of light. The black beyond. Probably thermal, she said quietly to the cab, because people talk to rooms when no one's there to discourage them. Metal contracts and expands. A breeze can learn to move just enough to make a strap tremble and reach the door with the smallest kiss. She waited, still as a deer near a fence, and then eased back under the blanket. Sleep returned, but she did not fold as deeply into it. It had a light above it now, a porch light of the mind. At 3:07, the same 3 taps came again. Same spot, same cadence. She opened her eyes before the third landed and was already reaching for the curtain's edge. The lot outside remained unchanged. The tanker to her right had its marker lights off. A dark mass. The day cab to her left might as well have been a boulder with a license plate. This time, something else spoke too. A solitary chirp near her head. The kind her small carbon monoxide alarm gave off when its battery wanted attention. She'd installed it after a friend told a story she didn't like, and it had been quiet as a stone ever since, content to be forgotten. One chirp. She frowned, reached up, hit the test button for good measure, heard the healthy trill, and cracked the side vent another notch. The air that came in smelled like dust and dry grass and the cold part of rubber. Nothing alarming, nothing sour. The chirp did not repeat. Across the lot, near the entrance, a flurry of amber light flickered against the skin of a box trailer. Hazards. Someone coming in from the highway, easing past the cars. The truck took a far spot and settled with the patience of the tired. Kaya's eyes slid along the row to the far edge, where one space occupied her attention without meaning to. A pickup sat nose in beneath a light, the bed full of cones and a broom, a magnetic light bar on the roof. No markings on the doors. The broom's shadow made a second broom on the pavement. She put on her jacket and slid down, careful with the latch. Air met her face with that clean, understated cool the planes give before dawn. Her boots made no more noise than a polite person would in a quiet hallway. She crossed to the building. Inside, the humming tiles of the vending area felt like the interior of a sugar cube. The bulletin board by the water fountain was the usual neighborhood of notices. A bake sale fundraiser for the volunteer fire hall, a laminated map of the county with dots marking historic windmills, an out-of-date poster about winter driving. In the corner, behind a flyer for lost gloves, a brass plaque held a name, Thomas Lyle. Courtesy watch, 1981, 2003, 3 knocks and a light. Below, a handwritten note in ballpoint had been tucked under the frame. Patrol schedule on hold. If you have concerns, use the courtesy phone. The courtesy phone on the wall was the color of a sherbet nobody ordered anymore. A drone of dial tone answered. A card next to it listed a number. For assistance, dial 9, then 7 to 7. She replaced the handset. There were more trucks now, and the lot felt more like a small town square between midnight and breakfast. On the way back out, she paused at the door. The pickup with the cones hadn't moved. The light bar made a tidy line against the sky. No one sat inside. A moth landed on the glass like a pilot. When she stepped into the night, another line of amber flared and went dark, a hazard switch being tested. The sound that went with it was a click, whispered into a glove. The 3 taps came again as she reached her steps, not on her door this time, but 3 spots down. Kaya stopped. The tanker she'd noticed earlier had a blue glow leaking through its curtains, a phone or tablet left face up somewhere in the dark of the cab. The glow made the interior look underwater. The taps were so gentle a person might mistake them for an idea. Then, silence. She stood a long moment and listened with the full width of her attention. The air was thickened with nothing more than the ordinary breath of parked diesels, the sigh of a highway so far off it might as well have been a photograph. She crossed to the neighbor's running board and knocked herself brisker, louder than a courtesy, but not enough to wake the owner of the County 3 over. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. The blue light glowed unchanged, steady and mild. Kaya pressed her ear to the edge of the door for one long beat. In another life, in another truck, maybe you'd hear a radio, a snore, the little restless shift of someone's sleep. She heard only the soft mechanical murmur of a bunk heater and the odd trickle of her own heartbeat. Her alarm gave a single chirp again from the other side of her cab, as if answering a question no one had asked. She stepped back and looked about the lot. Across the row, a driver in a hoodie stood on a fuel tank step, smoking in the compromisable way of someone who has promised to be finished soon. He raised 2 fingers a fraction when he saw her, and made a small what's-up tilt of his head. She returned it, then pointed at the blue-lit truck. He nodded and mimed a phone with his hand, then shook his head. Not his friend, not his business. He pointed with his chin at the building, at the courtesy phone. She nodded back, even though she knew she'd already checked it. On the way to the phone, the pickup with the cones caught her eye again. Up close this time, she saw a faded imprint on the door, where a decal had once been peeled off. The ghost letters, Courtesy Watch, leaving a pale suggestion on white paint. The broom's bristles were worn pleasant and square, the kind of wear that comes from use rather than neglect. On the dash, a little card in a plastic holder read, THOS, Lyle, in a typewriter font. Someone had placed a folded safety vest on the passenger seat, as if for a person who preferred to grab it with their left hand. Back at the sherbet phone, she dialed 977 and held the handset to her ear. It rang a long time. The ring had that faraway sound old phones make, as if tunneling through small rooms before it found the right one. On the 4th ring, a voice that sounded like a public building answered. Highway help. If this is life-threatening, hang up and dial 911. She pressed her tongue to her teeth and waited for the options. Option 2 promised to send a unit to her location. She pressed it, gave the mile marker, and said softly, Truck on the east row, with a blue light on might need a check. Not sure. Just a feeling. We'll notify patrol, the voice said, competent and bored. We have a delay tonight. Are you safe? Yes, she said, meaning it. She hung up and returned to her door. The 3 taps came again, gentle as a suggestion, but this time on the blue-lit truck. 3 neat notes, spaced like a heartbeat. She saw it now, the way the light inside caught dust motes in the cab, the slight shift of a curtain as if responding to the stirrings of a person half-dream, half-waking. She knocked again herself, firm. You good? She called, keeping her voice low, a night voice. A long second passed. Then a voice came from inside, muffled but present, the tone of someone assembling the world around their head. Yeah? A cough. Not unhealthy, just surprised to find the body still in its job. Yeah, I'm sorry. Overslept? The word sounded like a question a person asks themselves. Crack your window, Kaya said. She didn't know why the sentence arrived in her mouth with the confidence of instruction. but there it was. Good air. Please. The shade lifted an inch. A hand appeared, tugged the slider, made a small rectangle of night where glass had been. Air went in. Air came out. A face followed a kid, barely 30, eyes at the particular unfocused setting of recently woken people who had been very, very tired. He blinked at her. Time is it? You're okay, she said, answering the question he hadn't asked. It's early, you're okay. Thanks, he said. Honest gratitude, the kind that arrives clean before embarrassment can catch it. Heard something. Thought it was the wind. Kaya tipped her head at the pickup with the cones. Maybe it was, she said. He followed her gaze. The pickup sat with the placid patience of an old dog. Steady. Alert to nothing. They stood like that a minute, strangers made briefly companionable by an interruption. The hoodie smoker across the row flicked his cigarette into a bottle and tightened his sweatshirt around his wrists. In the far bay, a driver returned from the building, paper cup in hand, and vanished into a sleeper, with the practiced efficiency of someone who could become horizontal in under a second. The patrol didn't come immediately. It didn't need to. The lot had corrected itself by small human gestures. The opened vent, the shared glance, the decision to be a little more awake than weather demanded. Kaya climbed back into her cab, pulled the blanket over her legs, and sat propped, eyes half closed. The CO alarm said nothing more. It embarrassed her, if a square of plastic can, by returning to perfect obedience. At 3:21, 3 taps touched the door of the day cab on her left. The driver inside, a woman with hair braided flat, who had the confident fast walk of someone who could parallel park anything, pushed aside her curtain and looked out, then reached, opened her vent, and leaned back with a smile that said, of course. She had seen the plaque. She had lived enough miles to accept rituals. By 3:44, the lot held a soft murmur. Not talk, not noise. The kind of murmur you hear under a hymn when a congregation shifts from standing to sitting. The blue-lit truck's light went out, replaced by the more persuasive dark of deliberate rest. Kaya's eyes closed and opened in slow cycles, while her mind clicked through a scrapbook of small images: the broom shadow, the brass plaque, the 3 knocks as polite as a neighbor who knew the shape of your evening. Sometime before 4, a patrol unit did ease in, another pickup with an authoritative seal, and a light bar that knew how to be loud if permitted. It did not light. The driver, a man with one of those faces that looks like it spent time smiling, and other time learning not to step out and walk the row. He touched gloves to doors gently, the same rhythm. 3 taps. He looked up at the pickup with the cones and paused. He put his hand on the hood with the casual gravity you use to greet a stone you like. He glanced up at Kaya's window when she moved. She lifted a hand. 2 fingers. A small salute. He returned it. Neither of them spoke. She slept then, real sleep, the kind that drops you without scolding into a blank soft pool. When the first amber leak of morning began to mix with the sodium light, she woke and caught the end of a dream dissolving. 2 lines of trucks rolling through fog, and a man with a broom tidying the path behind them. Dreams do that, turn days into metaphors while the body's off duty. Coffee had never felt more appropriate. She slid on her boots, took the walk to the building, and stood while the machine made sounds as if inventing a beverage from first principles. On the bulletin board, a new square of paper had appeared overnight, thumbtacked below the plaque. In neat pen, someone had written, "Keep a vent. Knock back if you're awake." T. Lyle used to say, "We're each other's weather." Kaya smiled into her cup. On the way back to her truck, the kid from the blue-lit cab was sitting on his steps tying one boot. He looked up, sheepish and grateful all at once. "Hey," he said. "Thanks again. I don't know why I slept so hard." "Tanks will do that to you," she said. "Late day, early day, cracks in the world. Keep your air moving." He nodded like he'd pinned that to the inside of his mind. "You hear that knocking?" "Sometimes," she said. "Usually when you need it." He laughed softly, a sound with relief under it. "Weird nights," he said. "Good weird, I guess." "Good weird," she agreed. They rolled out within minutes of each other, signals flashing politely one after the other. The little choreography you learn without learning. The planes accepted them again. Straight and patient. In the mirror, The rest area became a small geometry, and then a dot. The courtesy watch pickup looked suddenly like any other truck that had ever been driven by an ordinary person doing an ordinary job that mattered. Later, 100 miles on, the CO alarm in her cab chirped once, the gentle reminder for a battery change. She laughed and tapped it with her nail. "I hear you," she said. She would buy a new battery at the next fuel stop. Maybe two. Old habits like to be reinforced. At a diner counter an hour down, a woman in a fleece vest poured coffee and, unprompted, said, "Cold night last night. Worth cracking a window even if it feels wrong. My uncle used to walk the rest area with a flashlight back when the state paid him to. Said the trick was 3 knocks. Any more, and you're rude." She grinned. "Any fewer, and you're not sure if you imagined it." Kaya raised her cup in a little toast. 3, she said. 3, the woman echoed, and moved down the line with the pot. The rest of the day went on with the small serendipities of Miles. A good green wave through a string of lights, a scale house blinked closed, a sky that decided to be blue instead of threatening weather out of habit. She thought only once more of the knocks, when the wind picked up later and pushed at the tanker's side like a big dog. She nudged the wheel and let the gust pass through, all that empty space inside the tank, speaking fluidly to momentum. Somewhere behind them all, beyond the line of sight, men and women walked slow rows with flashlights and brooms in memory, if not in fact, and a habit of safety moved like weather through parking lots. That night, at a different wayside 300 miles and 7 phone calls away, she parked again. A new row of trucks took their places around her with that practical grace that always made her like this life more. Before she closed her eyes, she reached up and turned the vent open the width of a finger, the size of a promise. When sleep came, it arrived the way the courteous knock did present, measured, kind. And if something touched her door in the night with 3 precise taps, she didn't wake to hear it. She didn't need to. She had already answered. Story number 6. Tariq had driven the same east-west artery often enough to know where the road liked to break its own rules. On maps, the highway looked like a clean ribbon. In the real world, it bent for mountains, the old alignment ducking into hills where the newer one ran around them. It was late enough that the truck's dash lights felt like candlelight in a quiet room. His trailer carried textile rolls, tidy and strapped, nowhere near max, forgiving on grades. He kept the speed modest and the lane centered, the kind of driving that makes the engine a companion rather than a challenge. At mile 181, the message boards began. Road closed ahead to tour next right. He watched for a wreck or a washout and saw neither just orange barrels standing at attention in the median and an arrow board winking in a slow, patient rhythm. A patrol SUV sat angled under the overpass with its light bar dark, authority expressed merely by presence. The sign at the gore point read, "Old Ridge Detour. Tunnel single lane wait for pilot car." Beneath it, smaller letters, "No oversize. Use. Low beams. Do not stop." He took the ramp, the trailer's weight tipping gently as the road turned its shoulder to the mountain. The detour lane ran on the old concrete, older texture under his tires, joints closer together, so the thrum changed key. A red signal head hung from a temporary pole at the tunnel mouth, a neat domestic lamp in front of something that was not domestic at all. "Official vehicles only," the sign on the crossarm warned, and then in friendlier letters, "Please wait. Pilot car leads every 15 minutes. The tunnel itself was a long black eye in the hillside, lined in tile that had once been white, and had since decided to be a color between cream and memory. A smile of bulbs arched inside, some glowing strong, some dim, some out entirely. Tariq set the brake and listened to the hush. The fans in the portal housing up above were still. Every so often one clicked with the tiny sound of a sleeping thing rolling over. He wasn't alone at the stop line. A refrigerated straight truck idled in front of him, its fan breathing in a regular, kindly way. Behind him, a flatbed carrying spools of rebar rolled up and settled. No one got out. This was the hour when you can feel the habit of patience like a muscle. Then the red head went dark, and a low amber light bloomed inside the tunnel. A car nosed into view, a long, square-bodied sedan with a magnet light on the roof. Amber bulbs set to a steady, non-flashing glow. Across the back window, a black and yellow panel said, "Follow me." The letters so simple they carried the weight of an instruction given to a child and to a convoy alike. The sedan eased forward, took the center, and paused at the line long enough to be ceremonial. The signal head turned green. The straight truck inched in after it, hazard lights off, as if trusting completely. Tariq released his brake and followed with the margin of space his gut liked on dark concrete. The flatbed's lamps made a small constellation in his mirror, and then the world narrowed to the simple, attentive rectangle of light thrown by his low beams. The old tile made stripes that wanted to be illusions. The curve of the wall pulled away and then came back. Every 100 yards, a niche cut into the side made a little dark mouth. Refuge bays that had once held a phone or an extinguisher, and now held only shadow and a plaque that named a number. Above, the ventilation duct breathed a long breath on, then a few seconds of off, a rhythm like someone counting with their eyes closed. Water ticked from somewhere up beyond the tiles in precise, unhurried drops. A sign overhead at the first quarter read, "Keep right of centerline, do not use shutter grates open." He believed it without seeing a single grate. His CB was off. He left it so. The sedan's amber light folded the colors of the tunnel into a smaller, quieter palette. 25 felt sensible. The follow me sign kept pace perfectly. Once it dipped, and he realized the car had passed a seam where the pavement settled a hair. The sign's letters stepped down gently and then rose again without drama. Lights on the ceiling flickered faintly, as if a person had walked across an upper floor to fetch something and thought better of it. At the second marker, the tiny blue rectangle meant for emergency phones shivered in his beam. It was an old-style blue enamel, white phone glyph, and beneath a steel cabinet with a pull handle. As his bumper came level, he heard it. One ring, clean and honest, neither loud nor timid, followed by nothing. The sound adjusted the air in the cab without permission. It was a ring that belonged to a hallway in a municipal building at noon, not to the mouth of a tunnel at 2:08 a.m. He considered saying something out loud just to make a sound he could own. He didn't. He breathed and watched the follow me. Inside the third niche, a shape stood for half a beat, too slow to be a trick of the eye, too fast to be anything else. Yellow, like a slicker, the kind of yellow that belongs to warning tape and to dandelions when they decide against compromise. The shape did not move. It resembled a person in the exact way you can look at a cloud and know the dog it resembles even if you are a grown-up. He passed it, and it remained exactly where it had been, not turning, not asking. At the next niche, there was nothing. He stopped expecting to make sense of the small sightings and let the tunnel explain itself on its own schedule. The sedan's follow me panel blinked off, then back on, as if a wire had remembered it was old and then remembered it wanted to be helpful. In the glance of darkness, the car's rear window became a mirror for the tile, and Tariq saw his own lights double, like a copy behind glass. He kept the wheel absolutely still for 3 seconds and felt the truck agree. His mirrors showed the flatbed following with a discipline that made him like the driver without seeing them. Out of the sedan's driver's side window, an arm appeared and made a small gesture, 2 little downward pats with flat fingers, the universal sign for keep it steady. We're good. The arm wore a sleeve that was not modern, sturdy fabric, a cuff that buttoned. It went back inside without flourish. The sedan's brake lights touched on once and released, purely to plant a rhythm. The tunnel's breath came again, fans on, then off, like a conversation conducted politely between stone and steel. Halfway in, the roof lowered a foot, and the tunnel took a gentle bend. A sign warned in a voice made almost comical by politeness. Do not sound, horn echo can confuse drivers. He smiled despite himself because of the way the sentence made an echo, a character with opinions. Beyond the sign, ceiling panels had been replaced more recently. They wore a different shade, a slightly brighter tooth. The sound changed in a way his hands registered and his ears caught up with after. He took it as a weather report, barometric but for concrete. He came level with a maintenance door set flush into the side wall. Above it, stenciled letters read Fan Room 3. The door's paint was the solemn green of 1976. A small placard beneath had a number in black and an instruction, call before entering. As his lights passed, he saw the slimmest slice of brass below the door, an old key plate polished by pockets. The thought that there were rooms inside the mountain arranged like rooms in a courthouse tugged at the little part of his mind that collects maps. The sedan kept its pace. Sometimes its tires brushed the paint stripe where the lanes had once been wider. Sometimes it took the invisible path of experience. Tariq matched without overthinking. The reefer in front of him had long since vanished into the bend and the sweep of distant bulbs. The flatbed's owner held a steady distance behind, the chain on the spool singing a small whisper when the pitch of the road changed, then falling silent again. At the third of the blue phone cabinets, the ring came again. One neat sound. He glanced at his dash out of habit, expecting his own phone to light like a fish and be disappointed. It stayed dark. The ring seemed to go back into the enamel and sit there like a clean tool laid on a cloth. The old ceramic tiles near the quarter-mile plates were lighter where 100,000 shoulder brushes had polished them over the years. A sign hung screwed to the wall at a tilt that communicated more about ladders than about negligence. The sign read, "Single file keep, a space ventilation in operation." The word ventilation was too satisfying to ignore. It made his tongue want to sit in the back of his mouth. He eased another truck length into the buffer between him and the sedan, a gift to himself more than to the rules. A form appeared in the sedan's back glass, someone's hand holding up a square. For half a second it read slow, the kind of orange paddles flaggers pass between them when they switch ends. Then it went away, as if embarrassed by its age. The sedan's brake lights pressed, released. Tariq eased his foot ahead of the change. He felt, rather than saw, a panel seam in the roadway where patch and original met in a whisper. The truck lifted and set down exactly as he hoped it would. At the far third of the tunnel, the ceiling lights were out for a stretch, maybe 7 fixtures dark in a row. A quiet space, if light can be called quiet. The sedan's amber bubble became the only warm thing. The "follow me" letters the only sentence. The tunnel's breath for that section was fan-off. Just the whisper of his own tires and distant drips counting. The lane lines faded, and he let the cat's eyes under the paint do the work. Little glass beads in long rows grabbing what light exists and giving it back as a handshake. The sedan's roof light flickered once more, and then steadied. And for exactly a second, Tariq understood what it feels like to cross a narrow bridge when the water below is hidden. But you remember it. Beside the fourth niche, a laminated notice had been taped with care to a speed limit sign. It read, "Keep off shoulder drains open work zone." Somebody had taped it straight and matched the corners to the metal like a teacher. He kept his track in the perfect middle and imagined grates with their mouths open, waiting for fallen nuts and pebbles, not for tires. The old tunnel had ways to make you behave. The phone rang again. One ring. He did not count this time. He let it be an agreement. The fans came on. The air across his face changed, in temperature by a suggestion. The sedan's "Follow Me" panel clicked, turned off, then on. The dots in the letters were the old kind, the kind ovals get when they are made of bulbs instead of screens. He wondered whether the car took pride in still making sense. When the tunnel let go of its tightest hold, the slope flattened, a palate cleanser. The ceiling lights grew healthier, as if they favored the air under the hill's lip. There was a smell, not strong, of something clean and old institutional paint, dust, the afterscent of rain on tile. Ahead, daylight collected like syrup. The sedan's amber crown dimmed in dignity for a few feet, as if acknowledging a theater curtain going up. They emerged into night again that wasn't black so much as the blue of ink before a letter. The mountain exhaled. Piles of old alignment lay in the cut to the side rock braces, a guardrail section waiting for a future, neat stacks of forms as if someone had cleaned up very carefully and then been called away. The sedan pulled onto the shoulder and idled at an angle. The "Follow Me" panel changed. "Thank you," it said, in the same letters that had asked. The driver's window slid down and the arm with the cuff appeared, this time accompanied by a hand that made a small, open-palmed wave. An ordinary, unassuming hello divided by goodbye. Tariq slowed a hair, enough to return the gesture without losing pace. He could not see the driver's face. A cap brim? Maybe. Or maybe that was the tunnel talking back to him from memory. He nodded anyway. Courtesy belongs where it's given. He rolled on, leaving a space behind him for the flatbed, which passed the sedan with equal restraint. In his mirror, the sedan's panel went blank once, then returned to "Follow Me," and its amber light turned its circle slowly, as if considering the next trip. By the time Tariq put a quarter mile between them, a wash of dark behind his trailer took the shape of the hill, and the sedan was just a suggestion tucked prudently into that shape. Back on the main line, after the detour rejoined the new road, a service plaza appeared like a small town where the buildings all agreed to be low. He took the truck lot and let the engine idle while his mind caught up to the outside world's larger proportions. Inside, the convenience store had the same fluorescent mercy as every other one, and the coffee tasted like hope and electricity in equal measure. A corkboard by the bathrooms held practical notices and a printed sheet from the highway authority that called for patience. Overnight closure bridge work, expect delays. Use sign detour, no stopping, and ridge tunnel escort provided as available. At the counter, a clerk scanned jerky for a guy in a reflective hoodie and said, "They opened that old tunnel again? Thought it was day shift only." The tone suggested the conversation had been happening in small pieces all week. An older woman in the next line, the kind of person whose jacket had a rescue squad patch from 15 years ago, glanced over. "They do. When the new lanes shut," she said quietly. "Only ever with escort. My sister used to be one of the drivers." She smiled, but it was small, contained. She said people drove calmer in there at night. They didn't try to be faster than the mountain. The clerk nodded. "I drive calmer too if a 50-year-old tile wall was looking at me." He slid change across that belonged somewhere else and added, "I heard they had to call off overnight escorts after that electrical issue a while back." The woman shrugged. "Somebody always knows how to flip a breaker when it matters." Tariq bought a bottle of water and a pack of peanuts he'd forget, and asked the question gently, not to break the spell. "The pilot car, older sedan? Follow me in bulbs, not LEDs? Like a granddad car?" she said. "Yeah, those are still around. They keep one running because that sign works even when the radios don't." "Why?" Her face opened politely to Story if he had one. "Just good escort," he said. It felt truer than any other answer. He went back to his truck with the taste of clean coffee in his mouth and the feeling of two hands on the wheel, even though he wasn't moving. He settled in to log some minutes and found something he knew he hadn't put in his visor clip. A yellowed paper square, perforated on one edge like it had been torn from a pad too carefully. "Escort pass," it said at the top. Block letters, with the line below stamped Ridge Tunnel westbound, date blank. A printed name at the bottom. S. Brenner Turnpike Authority pilot vehicle. A tiny illustration of a sedan with a box on its rear window stood in the corner. As if to prove the pass imagined the same shape he had followed. He turned it over. On the back, in pencil, someone had written in tidy letters, "No horns, low beams. Keep left of the seam by fan room 3. He didn't know how it had found its way into his truck. Trucks accumulate talismans like couches collect coins. He tucked it back. Not like a charm, but like a page in a notebook you plan to read again. The hour moved on. He rolled back out, letting the highway's wider lanes regain their claim on his attention. The night did the thing nights do where the horizon peels up like a stamp, starting to unstick. The dark more blue than black. Somewhere around mile 201, a tractor with a fresh paint job and the practiced confidence of someone who knows his truck pulled alongside long enough to match speed. The driver glanced over, older, gray at the beard, cap from a small-town fire department. He lifted 2 fingers and then pointed forward, made a little rolling gesture, a question that meant, "You do the detour?" Tariq returned the 2 fingers, then mimed an amber bubble with one hand, the sign he would use if he were 8, and telling someone a story about a car with a light on top. The other driver grinned, nodded with a kind of pleasure that had nothing to do with being scared and everything to do with recognizing the same odd pocket of road. He mouthed, "Good car," and then rolled on, a quiet theater of mutual understanding complete. Later, when the day made the mountain look smaller than it had at night, he saw the old portals slip by in daylight and thought, different creature. He could see the tile, the scuffs, the old paint, and the reliability that hides behind things that still work past their design date. Traffic moved smoothly through the new cut the way water chooses the wider path. He didn't feel any special tug to look into the tunnel's throat. He didn't need to. A picture lived in his mind in better contrast. Every few weeks, the route took him past the same pair of message boards and the same cut. Sometimes the detour was in effect, sometimes not. When it was, he waited without complaint and let a sedan with a "Follow Me" panel emerge from shadow and ask him to keep 25 like a gentleman. Sometimes the car looked modern, LEDs neat as teeth. Once or twice it looked older than the trucks in line. It didn't matter which. He thought of the note on the back of the pass and kept off his horn and watched for a seam near fan room 3 and listened without leaning toward superstition, to a single clean ring from a blue cabinet, where a phone might or might not still live. There was no moral he needed to carry beyond the one the sign had given him before the mouth of the tunnel. Do not stop. Keep pace. Low beams. Follow. Out on the wider highway, with daylight laying new paint on the world, the rules look simpler than they feel at 2 in the morning under a hill. But he kept a gentle space in his lane for old things that still did their job. And when a square-bodied sedan with a box on its rear window flickered briefly in his thoughts, he let it lead, the way one lets experience lead even when one is not sure where it lives now. Story number 7. Priya had learned the night habits of the old industrial corridor. The way smokestacks went quiet after midnight. The way brick warehouses looked soft under the blue glow of distant floods. The way the expressway ran like a dark canal between empty loading docks. She liked this hour. The reefer behind her carried frozen vegetables, a balanced, easy pull that made the truck feel cooperative instead of moody. The steering wheel hummed under her hands, a lived-in vibration like a cat's contentment. She was eastbound on a stretch where the turnpike used to be king. New lanes had long since bypassed the creaky bits, but in the distance, the ghost shape of an old toll plaza still sat astride the blacktop like a doorway no one had gotten around to taking down. She'd always seen it from the new alignment, a square of booths, a broken canopy, a cluster of defunct lights like stars that forgot their lines. Her GPS chirped once with the clinical cheer of a device that has never been lonely. Construction ahead detour. Half a mile later, the overhead signs confirmed it. Left 3 lanes closed, all traffic, use Old Pike Spur. The arrows glowed a soft amber through mist. On the shoulder, drums lined up with the patience of chess pawns, reflective bands quiet as piano keys. As she eased toward the detour, a smaller sign popped up in the weeds, the kind cast in pressed aluminum that keeps its authority even after the paint fades. Exact change 1 mile. She blinked, then smiled to herself. The state hadn't collected coins here in years. Electronic tolling had handled the main line long enough that tokens were now the stuff of shadow boxes and memory. But detours pull up odd routes. Ahead, the old building stepped closer. The canopy's underside painted in that long-ago color that wants to be white and settles for eggshell after time and weather have their say. A handful of lane signals sat like patient faces. Red X or green arrow, the simplest language that roads know. Priya had expected them to be dead. Instead, one over the center lane flicked green, steady and calm. The rest glowed red with a kind of courteous apology. A faded board across the trusses announced Toll Plaza Lancaster Spur in serif letters that belonged to an era when signs were designed by hands. Beneath, someone had strapped a newer placard with zip ties. Detour Keep Center, no stopping beyond booth speed 15. The numbers looked as if they'd been cut from reflective tape by a careful person and stuck on with a library paste brush. She downshifted and rolled toward the single open lane. The booth's window was dark. Behind the glass, a swivel chair sat pulled back, a stack of forms on the counter under an old green-shaded lamp whose chain hung still as a thought. A paper cup rested on a little square of cardboard. The ring it had made dried into a brown halo. The center of the lane held a coin basket, squat and round, its rubber throat clean. The kind of clean that suggests either recent use or reverence. A sign above it read, Exact Change $1. A smaller note, taped neatly on the Lexan, said, Please do not throw keys. Priya smiled again despite herself. Tradition made her slow to a respectful stop, even though the board had said not to. The booth speaker grill sat beside the window, a circle of holes in a metal plate. It hissed once, a sound like cloth moving. Good morning, driver, a voice said, smooth and unhurried, neither tinny nor quite present. The tone of someone who has stood watch so long the hours accord respect. Keep the center lane on the viaduct. Crosswind at the second span. No stopping on the plates. You are clear. Her hands found neutral for a heartbeat, startled simply because it had been so ordinary. Copy, she said aloud before she could decide not to. Her own voice sounded like it had put on its best manners. The coin basket made a soft clink. She looked down. 2 brass tokens lay nested together like things that had agreed to meet. Round, heavy, the size of an old dollar. One side bore a keystone and the words State Turnpike Lancaster Spur. The other showed a little relief of a toll booth under a canopy, and the numeral 50 inches the middle as if 2 of them had once been a fair. The metal had the warm tone of objects that have done a lot of work and expect to do more. She hadn't dropped anything in. She was sure of it. She glanced at the booth. The chair hadn't moved. The lamp was unlit. If someone had pressed a button, they'd done it with a discipline that erased the trace. A green sign beyond the booth read, "Viaduct Keep Center Drive Plate Joints Ahead." It was an old style too. The kind of engineering instruction that didn't mind being literal. She set the brake, pocketed one of the tokens, laid the other in the well by the shifter like a small promise, and eased forward into the lane marked by a parade of cat's eyes sunk in the concrete, their glass beads winking gently back what they took in. The viaduct rose above the river flats, a mile's worth of steel deck laid over lattice. The first span was smooth enough that the reefer's hum became the instrument a room tunes itself to. The grating plates sang under the tires a low metallic hum, with notes that shifted as if the road were playing itself. On her right, the old eastbound lanes slumbered under tarps and cones, equipment crouched like dozing animals. On her left, far below, a thread of water braided through the dark like a polite conversation. Halfway across the first span, an overhead sign lit quietly, not with the flash of modern gantries, but with the calm glow of bulbs asked to perform one more time. "Keep left of seam wind shear." The message felt like a hand at the small of her back. She obeyed without dramatic movements, leaning the truck half a wheel's width left. In the same breath, a breeze came at the trailer from starboard, with the confidence of a person who knows the house well, steady, not teasing, enough to push, but not enough to claim. The rails sang a fraction higher in their pitch and then settled. "Center line holds truest at the third panel," the speaker said. So softly she could have thought the booth had followed her. Which of course it hadn't. The words rode in the cab the way some warnings do, factual, like a turn shown by a finger. Priya let the plates do their music and kept the steering steady. The old metal, when it wanted to, spoke across the bones of the truck, with a kind of sincerity that newer pavements never learned to bother with. The second span's wind nuzzled the trailer again and gently bowed out. There was a split near the far shore, where the spur met local ramps. Even in daylight it could be confusing, the lines worn to pale threads, the arrows on the concrete, half-sanded by salt and time. Tonight, the confusion had been cleared by the smallest acts of care. Someone had set little battery beacons where the concrete parted. Soft amber pips that showed a path with an etiquette that made you like whoever had placed them. A sign above them said left to main line, right to river road, keep center for detour. She took the center because the booth had asked, and because the beacons made the idea of doing otherwise feel rude. As she slid between splits, her right mirror caught a pile of rails straight ahead, where right would go old guardrail length, stacked like bones. On the left, a backhoe crouched under a tarp, a hunched shape in the glow. The center slipped past all that to a strip of clean concrete, like a mile-long handshake. Beyond the viaduct, a second, smaller toll island appeared in the median, a maintenance gatehouse, really, the kind crews use. Its window glowed faint and golden, the color of a living room lamp in a quiet house. As she approached, the light went down to a low ember and then returned. The sign over the doorway read Toll Plaza West Staff. A clipboard sat on the counter. A mug the color of a robin's egg nested near its edge, half full of something that had forgotten its heat hours ago. Through the glass, a wall clock with a white face held its hands at 2:17, unhurried, as if it had sets of minutes to lend. The wall outside the door had a framed photograph under plexi. In it, a man in a short-sleeved uniform shirt stood under the canopy, elbow on the coin machine. The grin of someone whose jokes are better delivered without a microphone. The little caption strip read, "El Greeley Night Supervisor, 1980, 2001. Someone had drawn a fine line arrow and the word friendly beside his name, not in graffiti, but in a tidy hand like a clerk. Her lane brought her back to the live lanes. Ahead, a variable message sign in the new style whispered its advice. Use caution, flaggers ahead. It would be lit, regardless of who tended what. But as she eased past the shoulder, a different board, an old flip disk sort mounted on a bracket, clicked once and posed a thought. Keep a space, do not crowd plates slick if damp. The discs flipped with the tiniest sound like cicadas in a distant tree. On the far side of the detour, the road fell into the familiar, newer concrete, wide and quiet, lines bright as fresh chalk. Priya let the truck taste the wider lane, and only then glanced down at the token in the tray. In the half-light of the dash, the keystone winked back with unhurried pride. She ran her thumb around its rim, feeling the shallow engraving, the way the metal had been pressed a long time ago to honor the moment you drop a circle into a basket and the light says, in bright letters across the canopy, "Thank you." At the next service plaza, a low complex with brick columns and a mural of a canal boat on its wall, she took a bay under lights to shake off the feeling that the night had leaned close to whisper something sensible. The lot was a patterned grid of tractor trailers, each square of chrome and paint reflecting pieces of the others. Inside, the air had the same hum and coffee breath it always had. She bought tea because coffee at this hour would have turned her eyes into shined coins, and stood by a case of old turnpike memorabilia the authority kept for charm's sake. A line of tokens under glass, a little brass emergency telephone plate, a sample of the old paper tickets with their columns of tolls like bus schedules. The tokens were almost identical to the one in her pocket. The little card said, "Turnpike tokens, 1,950, 2001. The display of tickets was headed by a laminated article that recounted a winter power outage, how attendants in thick coats had guided motorists through by lantern light, how crews had parked their R17 sedans sideways to block the wrong ramp. There was a black and white photo of the plaza men with a caption, "Night Crew, Lancaster Spur, 1,998. Beneath it, smaller, L. Greeley far right, with flashlight. She didn't need to make a story out of it. The plaza belonged to the same category as an old wrecker sitting at a brake check and a hand-lettered sign in a maintenance shed. Things put in the world by people to keep other people's nights simpler. Some of those things outlast their original hour. Some of them learn to speak in ways not written down. At the counter, the cashier had an easy way of organizing change like you stack cards. He wore a sweater vest and a name tag that said Hal in a font that could have been older than the shelves. When he saw the token sitting in Priya's palm, he nodded toward the case as if she had lifted it from there. "Haven't seen one in a while," he said. 3 turned up in the coin return last week. We put 'em in the display. People get a kick out of remembering when a basket could thank you. They still can," she said, and heard how that must sound. She shrugged at herself and added, "Detour took me through the old plaza. Somebody kept the lights on nice." Hal smiled the way people do when they want to admit something without signing any papers. "They do that sometimes. We got a lot of pieces wired together out there, some new, some older than dirt. Takes a gentle hand. Old places like to be treated like they still matter." He slid her tea across. "Wind on the viaduct?" "A little," she said. "Felt seen." He nodded. "Lyle used to say that," he said with the familiarity of first names used in a family way. "Night supervisor. Knew every joint in that deck by its first name. Good at telling people where to put their tires. He'd stand there and point with 2 fingers so you knew exactly which part of the road he meant. He talked the nerves out of folks." He gestured toward the corridor of photos. "Keeps people company, even now, I think. That's what a job is, you know? Company." Back on the road, the detour dissolved into distance, and the plaza became a square of structure between the ribs of the bridge. Priya set the cruise lower than she might have, and listened to the engine's long breath. She didn't turn on the radio. The night had said enough. An hour later, when the highway bent around a town where a mill chimney pushed a vertical line into the sky like a pencil that had no paper, her phone buzzed faintly against the console. No number, a single hiccup of a notification that vanished when she reached for it. One of those half-ghosts modern machines produce when they try to greet each other in the dark. She let it be. There are only so many voices you can honor at once. Before dawn, she parked at a little independent stop that had survived by deciding to be better at pie than its competition. The owner had lettered all the signs himself. The chalkboard by the coffee station had blocky white words that said, "Ice on stairs, take your time." Someone had drawn a cartoon cup with steam that looked like spelling. On the way back to the truck, a driver in a dark knit cap nodded and said, "You get the spur?" She nodded back. He grinned. "Good lane last night," he said. "Kept the arrows simple." He did a small, unconscious motion with his hand like tracing a lane line in the air. "Right down the middle. Made me feel like I could be new again for a second, and not mess it up." She touched the token in her pocket like it was a coin you flip to decide something and you don't actually flip it because you already know the answer. "Heavy." "Cool." real in a way that made the earlier moment feel more factual, not less. By late morning, the detour had lifted. But nights cycle, and the next week the message board sent her the same way while a lane poor cured on the main line. She took the center again. The canopy looked patient. The booth window looked the same shade of unlit. The green arrow above the lane bled its soft permission across the glass. When she reached the basket, there was no token, no voice. Only the sound of the coin throat breathing quietly like a seashell, and the little notch of the canopy light that sometimes says, "Thank you" when the number is right. She reached into her pocket, pressed her kept token to her thumb like a seal, and set it back in the well. It could live there. On the far span, when the wind stepped out from behind the hill and tried a polite hand on the back of the trailer, the overhead sign blushed on with 2 words: "Keep center." She did. The plate sang lower this time. Content. If someone had a hand hovering above a switch somewhere in an old room with a clock that had once been carried up a ladder and hung by a person who liked things straight, she hoped their coffee was warm and their night felt worthwhile. At a little museum table near the next plaza's restrooms, a retired attendant with a volunteer badge was telling a small knot of curious kids that toll tokens were like arcade coins for the road, and everybody laughed, and you could hear in the laughter that adults had filed away their panic years ago and kept only the good parts, the part where a hand on a microphone said, "Come ahead, keep your lane, don't crowd, you're doing fine." Priya slept well that afternoon in a motel that smelled faintly of cleaner and summer lawn, even though it was winter, the kind of room that disguises itself as an invitation to be anonymous for a few hours. When she woke at dusk, the token had left a round impression in her palm where she'd fallen asleep holding it. She grinned at herself for being sentimental, and then didn't correct it. The road keeps its own trophies. You can choose to call them tools. Years later, the old plaza is truly gone. Canopy dismantled, booths hauled off, islands scraped level and reseeded. And yet, on misty nights, she'll sometimes catch a wash of green where the center of the road should be, like a memory the pavement holds to help you out. The viaduct still has a spot where the crosswind steps. The overhead still sometimes finds the words. In her tray, the token moves from truck to truck as she trades rigs and route numbers, the metal worn smoother at the edges. When new drivers ask for directions near the river, she says, "Take the center at the split. If the wind taps you, don't fight it all at once. Keep a space. The road will talk to you." And then, because she's learned the trick of talking nerves out of people, she adds, "If you hear a voice where you think no voice should be, say thank you and keep your lane." That's someone's job they liked enough to keep doing. Story number 8. Nadine liked the winter plains for their honesty. Out here, there were no surprise hills to hide behind, no trees pretending to be walls. The highway ran true, a dark ribbon across a white field, and a person could see weather coming the way you see a train light coming down a long straight. Her reefer purred steady behind her dry goods this time, nothing delicate, and the cab held a measured warmth, thermostat set, so the windows wouldn't fog. She had additive in the tanks and extra gloves in the door pocket. The plan was simple. Cross the high county before dawn, slide into a truck stop with a pot of coffee that had learned patience, and sleep while the day did whatever it wanted to do. At mile 412, a sign began to blink in that slow, persuasive way only highway signs can manage. Whiteout conditions. Next 40 miles. Pilot plows top of hour. Use left lane. She eased off the cruise and let the truck ride the center like a balance beam. The sky had the color of a sheet of aluminum. The moon was a smudged nickel behind it. Around her, the snow that had fallen earlier sat in polite drifts along the fence lines. Wind hadn't started its mischief yet. At mile 420, another sign. Chain up area 1 mile right. Trucks ahead began to signal and peel off like geese taking a field one by one. Nadine took the slip with them. The area was nothing more than 2 long bays and a small cinder block outpost with a porch light on, but it felt like a town square. Drivers stood with hoods up and gloves on, listening to the air, counting seconds between gusts that hadn't arrived. A maintenance pickup idled near the end, its blue strobe turned low, casting a rinse over snowbanks like the inside of a twilight. On the porch, a board read, "Pilot runs at 12, 2, 4, pair beams divided by leave space." A smaller note, County 6 leads. Keep eyes on the wands. Nadine set her brake and stepped down. The cold found the bridge of her nose first and made a small, polite complaint. She pulled her cap low and checked her lines and lights, the ritual that always made her mind agree with her hands. The wind was a rumor. The air, very still. A guy in a parka with a knit hat stamped his boots nearby and said to no one in particular, "They'll take us as far as the river cut. After that, the pines break the wind. Keep your hood where the glass is the clearest. Don't let your eyes wander." He sounded like he'd been told this by someone who cared about him. A clock in the cinder block building glowed 1:57. A voice came over a speaker mounted under the eave, thin and practical. "Convoy forming. Keep it tight, folks. Low beams. If you can't see the wands, you're out of center. Do not stop in the lee of a cut. Do not pass the plow." That last instruction was part law and part promise. Nadine climbed back in, flipped the inner axle lock as a kindness to herself, turned her engine brake off, and settled. Outside, a snowfall finer than flour began to move sideways. She could see it in the beam of the porch light, the night's soft fur being stroked the wrong way. At the top of the hour, a high yellow blink appeared at the far end of the lot. It wasn't the stabbing flash of police or fire. It was the older, slower rotation of a beacon that expects you to understand it. The plow eased in like a ship, broad wing folded against its side, V-box salt spreader resting, amber bar, turning, cab roof wearing an old-school light that threw its color like honey. County 6 was lettered on the door in vinyl that had seen more winters than some drivers. On the back of the cab, a small panel was bolted. "Follow plow, keep back." The paint on the plow blade was scuffed to gray along the lower edge, where it had shaken hands with 1,000 asphalt miles. The truck took its place in the lane, idled a second, then dipped its wing and nodded forward, an animal lowering its head before pushing into wind. The CB had been off, out of courtesy and habit. Nadine reached and thumbed it to life, more to hear the room tone of Channel 19 than to ask for news. Static slid by, like a sheet being straightened on a bed. Then on 17, a channel the county had been known to favor someone tapped their mic. A simple double click, check, check. A voice followed, calm and country clean. The sort of voice that can fold directions into a meal. "Convoy, this is County 6. We'll take it at 20. Keep eyes on the wands. If you can't see me, keep to the cat's eyes. Stay on the crown. Do not stop on the crest, no matter what you think you're seeing. We'll pause at the river cut. Copy." Mix clicked back like polite nods. Nadine pressed hers once and said, "Copy. 6. Because she had been raised to return greetings. The voice came again, a shade of warmth in it now, like recognition you feel for someone you've never met. "Evening, reefer with the Northline Company," it said. "Your marker lights read true. Keep them that way." She felt her shoulders relax a degree. The plow rolled. Snow met the blade with a sound like someone shaping a pillow, soft and insistent. The amber bar rotated and wrote slow arcs on the falling flake. The lot fell behind. The highway swallowed them. Whiteout has rules. It takes away the horizon first, then the edges, and last the sense of distance. But the road still tells the truth with small things. Tall fiberglass wands with reflective tape stood at intervals on the shoulders, B-sharp notes against a white staff. The cat's eye beads in the center line took the light and gave it back in a thin, steady chain. The sound under the tires was the quiet knit of packed snow. Nadine kept a gear she could count on without looking, and let her hands move like someone threading a needle. Wind arrived, not as a slap, but as a decision. It came over the fields and across the cut banks, shouldered low, carried dust of powder that creased and uncreased around the plow's wake. County 6's wing pushed a clean channel. The amber turned and turned. In the beam of the truck's low lights, flakes behaved like fish, darting toward glass, veering at angles that made the road feel like water. The mind wants to follow the flake. She refused it that indulgence and pinned her eyes where the plow's tires made dark vertebrae in snow. Center holds truest on the long stretch by mile 8, County 6 said on 17. Wind peels off there. If you feel her slide, let her settle before you ask her to speak again. The voice made the truck sound like a person you coax, rather than a machine you command. Ahead, a low billboard ghosted past a cow in summer grass advertising a dairy that didn't exist for 100 miles in any direction. Its shape in the snow was a place you could lose the edges of the lane. but the plow made its path through with the patience of a slow dancer. A mile marker leaned under weight. The number on it was masked in sugar. Off to the right, a drift fence ran like the rib cage of a giant animal, catching what it could, not arguing with what it couldn't. There was a pull-out before a cut, where semis sometimes stopped to pull chains tighter. Tonight, the pull-out looked like the idea of a parking lot flat, white, featureless. A dark bulge near its center might have been a car, or might have been a bush. Nadine kept the crown under her, and looked only where the plow asked her to look. On the CB, someone behind her let a laugh slip out and apologized instantly, like they'd dropped a spoon. "County 6. A different voice said, young, earnest, more out of breath than he needed to be. "My first winter on this stretch. Thanks for the lead." "Nothing to it," County 6 said. "Keep 2 cat's eyes of space and think like you're carrying eggs. We'll make a left around the silo foundation. Don't let that shape push you to the ditch." They did. The old silo base appeared as a round ink blot in the white. Wind climbed the ring and argued with itself, and threw its own voice back into the lane. The plow cut inside it, like riding around a thumbprint. Nadine's mirrors showed nothing but her own lights shivering slightly in their housings, and a faint echo of the flatbed behind, a statement of existence rather than a picture. By mile 430, the world had closed to a gentle oval around the plow's back end. The amber bar rode its circles. The taillights blinked when the driver tapped brakes to keep rhythm, and the wing threw powder like soft sand. At the bottom of a shallow dip, a sign rose out of the light with surprising good sense. "Watch for ice bridge, wind forms plates." It spoke like a neighbor, warning you about a step. The plow's voice came with it, a second layer of advice. "We'll take this slow. Don't touch your Jake. If she hums, let her." The bridge presented itself as a slightly different sound, the hollow, taut string of deck steel under a drum of snow. The wind celebrated the flatness with a moment of confidence. The plow's brake lights expressed a thought, and then released it. Nadine kept her feet gentle. The truck moved with dignity. On the right, the snow fence had failed and drift piled shoulder high, but the lane held. Past the bridge, the grade rose an inch 100 feet, the kind of tilt that makes a truck feel carved into the world again. She let one breath out slow. At the river cut, the world eased. A black line of pines stood on either side like ushers. The wind caught its breath somewhere up above, and forgot to push so hard. Snow became flakes again, instead of smoke. County 6 drew into the right lane and pulled up shoulder side under the stand of trees. The amber bar slowed enough to look contemplative. 2 more plow trucks loomed in the dark. No lights. Relief sculptures in snow. Their shapes had the old squareness of trucks built when steel had fewer opinions. One had a county seal from a county that didn't border this one anymore. Nadine thought, storage yard. The thought felt wrong. The trucks looked ready for road, not waiting for spring. "Hold up," County 6 said. "Stretch your eyes. If your wipers taught the glass a habit, break it." He let the channel be quiet. Everyone took their small breaks without a lot of theater water from a bottle. A glove flexed. A blink that took 3 seconds instead of 1. From the line of trees, a sound came that didn't match wind or engine. It was a slow, steady tick. Not threatening. The kind of tick you hear from a machine cooling or warming, from a stove that remembers tin. It matched nothing on the dash and no known rhythm in her head. She leaned a hair, listening, and realized it was coming from the snow itself, a melt freeze on twigs making small percussion. The brain collects odd noises as risk. She filed this one under nature and let it be part of the room. The plow's mic clicked. "We'll take one more long piece, then you can drop to your stops. Blizzard eases after town. If you need to pull in at Double Elk, park facing north. Don't nose east. Drifts will make you regret it." Nadine pictured the truck stop lot, the way drifts snake through between the pump islands, the way wind can make a wall 6 feet high where nothing was before. They rolled again. The wands by the shoulder had gained small coats, reflective tape turning acne-pocked with hard snow. The cat's eyes on the center line still caught light like patient animals. On the left, a windrowing of snow off the plow's blade made a small, constant wave. They passed a farm lane, and a mailbox stood wild-eyed in its drift. Nadine thought of a person inside that house walking a hand along a hallway without lights, counting steps in familiarity, willing the thermostat to mean what it promised. Coming up on county line, County 6 said, and then something changed in the voice, not content, not instruction. Weather had given him a note of fondness he hadn't invited. You'll see an old sign in a minute. Sheesh to the fence. You'll think it isn't for you. Read it anyway. The sign rose out of the snow where a secondary road joined from a field. Old Ridge Chains Aria Keep Left, divided by Keep Kind. The second line was not dot issue. Someone had borrowed a stencil and made a sentence. Wind had chewed the paint. The letters held. Nadine read the words and, without agreeing to anything, felt less alone. 2 more miles, and the white opened. It did it quietly, like a curtain that someone had already drawn back for you, and you're only now noticing light. The flakes became separate things again. The plow took its foot off the invisible gas and rolled them into a world with edges. The convoy spilled into the warmth of a little town street lamps, their small halos comforting as living rooms. Double Elk Station appeared on the right with its forecourt lights on, throwing gold onto snow like a gift. Trucks lined in rows with their noses north, obedient and square. County 6 slid into the yard and circled once in front of the pumps like a shepherd making sure all the flock had found fence. He pulled up under a giant hand-painted sign that had once advertised a brand of oil and now advertised biscuits. The amber bar stilled then, as if embarrassed by being watched, settled into a slower rotation, and went entirely quiet. Behind the glass of the station, a bulletin board sat near the coffee urn. It had the usual notices and one laminated sheet that made the hair at the back of Nadine's neck feel happily foolish. It read, "Winter rules keep center face north between the wands if you hear Huck. Say thank you." Below, a photo showed a man in a parka, mustache iced, leaning against the nose of a plow with a jaunty grin. The caption, "Herschel Huck Moran, County 6, Night Lead 1980, 9-2007. In black marker, someone had added a tiny snowflake beside his name. The cashier poured coffee with the economy of someone who has poured a lot of coffee and said, "You get let in by 6?" Nadine nodded. The woman smiled. "Huck taught that route its manners," she said simply. "We get the new trucks with the blue lights now and the radios that sound like a submarine. But some nights, when it's sideways and you can't tell what land is, you hear that old rig on 17 and your bones calm down. He says the same things our dad said. Between the wands. Stay on the crown. Don't stop on the crest. It's not spooky. It's kind." Through the window, County 6 sat in the lot, a shape at ease. The amber bar was off. The cab showed no silhouette. The blade leaned against a bank the way a person leans against a kitchen counter and tells a story. A newer plow rolled in behind it, powder rolling off its fenders, blue LED bar crisp, operator visible, nodding to someone unseen. The sight of both trucks together, one square and quiet, one modern and busy, made Nadine's chest feel 2 kinds of gratitude stacked on top of each other. She ate a biscuit that tasted like this part of the world and called dispatch to say she was bedding down for a few hours. Outside, the wind tried a half-hearted run at the pump islands and forgot what it was doing halfway through. Drivers drifted in and out with the look of people pulled back from a task rather than pulled off of it. In the restroom, a flyer had been thumbtacked up with tape. Stay north. Facing divided by Coates and Lost, and found cleaned weekly. Divided by, if somebody knocks 3 times on your door, crack a window. The world is full of small, sensible rules that make a body feel watched over. Nadine parked nose to the north and set her brake with care. She closed her eyes and still saw the slow rotation of amber behind them, circles on circles. Sleep came easy as snow on a fence. In the soft part of it, she dreamed the plow moved down an endless white, and the wands bowed as it passed, and the voice on 17 said, "You're doing fine," to anyone who had accidentally needed to hear it. She woke at noon to a sky the color of a fresh sheet, wind absent, snow piled mathematically along the ditches, the road a long gray musical staff between perfect measures. Out on the highway, the wands stood straight, tape bright. The air smelled like nothing but air. She rolled with the bike-like ease of dry pavement for miles, and thought only once of Huck that the right kind of advice stays useful long after the radio is quiet, and that a plow's work is a kind of storytelling, and that the road sometimes remembers who spoke to it kindly and tries to answer in the same tone. Later, 2 states over at a rest area that pretended to be a lodge and pulled it off. A bulletin board by the maps had a photo pinned slightly askew. It was County 6 again. Blade up, wing folded, driver's door open to the boringly beautiful light of day. Someone had written across the bottom, in a hand that leaned, "Between the wands, stay on the crown. Keep going." And like a magnet on a refrigerator, the words held the paper flat. Story number 9. Cal liked the Great Plains at night because the towns showed themselves honestly from far away, a zipper of yellow windows under a water tower, a grain elevator with a red beacon pulsing like a slow heartbeat, a 2-block main street that backed up against a railroad, and decided that was the edge of the world for now. His run tonight took him across 4 counties of winter-dry prairie, the air cold enough that the stars looked chiseled. The trailer was a dull, obedient box of paper goods. The cab heater had found a steady rhythm. The road let him keep an even hand. The map said he'd be across Eden Point around 3. Eden Point had used to be a bigger deal. The old rails had made a hump yard there, a set of tracks fanning like a hand, a tower that watched cuts roll by with the patience of a librarian, a black trestle over a narrow river. These days, the hump was quiet, shaved flat into classification tracks kept mostly for agricultural season. The elevator still worked, and the spur still saw business when the crops came in, and the grade crossing on County 12 still cut diagonally across the highway, with 8 rails and 2 sets of signals like stubborn punctuation. He came over a low rise and saw the elevator's red light blink. It set a calm tempo that made your eyelids heavy if you looked too long. The highway drew a straight seam through stubble fields that had been combed clean by wind. His headlights found the reflective crossbucks at the crossing and the big cantilever signal arms that reached over the lanes like officiants. The blue emergency information sign at the side named the crossing in white. .460 8311G. A phone number. An instruction. In emergency, call. The signals began to flash before he reached them. The bells took up their neat, repetitive work. The gates lowered with a mechanical dignity that never failed to make a person instinctively slow. Cal eased off and rolled to a stop with the nose even with the line. The reefer hummed behind him, unbothered. He looked left and right along the rails out of simple habit. No headlight. No horn down the line. Just the white chalk of frost on ballast, the dark stripe of steel, the long ghost of the yard ahead where tracks bled into each other under a cut of trees. He waited. The bells kept time. The elevator beacon blinked out its own measure, unhurried. A dot of light far down the line did not exist. The road behind him remained a soft, empty quantity. He listened for the freight that wasn't there. Wheels on rails sing from a long way away if the night is the right shape. He heard only a faint creak from the signal mast, the kind of complaint metal makes when it's old and the temperature remembers how to argue. Somewhere in the yard, a coupler settled with a gentle clonk. Then another. Not close. Not threatening. The sounds were degrees of thought assembling themselves in a place his eyes could not find. Cal draped his hand over the top of the wheel and watched vapor curl from the stacks of pipes beside the elevator like invisible breath. The gates remained low. The bells remained proper. The lights made their tidy, alternating glow. Red, red, red. He looked at the blue sign again. He had never had to call it. The numbers on those signs are for when you get stuck, when a bus stalls, when a driver miscalculates a turn. Tonight the road was dry and banished excuses. He felt a small, sensible tug at his attention anyway, the sort of nudge a well-designed system gives to let you know you are part of it. He set the brake and reached for his phone. The number rang twice and found a voice that had the calm of linoleum floors and waiting rooms. Railroad emergency, it said. Location? Eden Point, County 12, Cal answered, reading the DOT number from the sign. Gates are down. No train in sight. One moment, the voice said, not surprised and not bored. He heard keys. Somewhere, a quiet relay clicked, as if a tiny door had been opened and shut very precisely. We show a malfunction at your crossing. Please remain stopped. Crew is notified. Will advise. He nodded even though no one could see him. Copy, he said, because he liked conversations to have a clean shape. He hung up and rested the phone face down, so he wouldn't look at the time. The night would move at the speed it wanted. He cracked his window an inch and let the cold put its hand on his cheek. Frost sharpened the smell of things creosote in the ties, grain dust, whatever thin sweetness winter grass finds when it dies back. To his left, down the highway, a single porch light marked a farmhouse. To his right, a billboard offered seed that would make next summer better, a promise printed by people who knew that words like better and next summer did real work in places like this. A lamp winked on in the old yard tower. The tower had been banked dark. Now a room high in its middle showed a light the color of paper, warm but faint, the way an old bulb illuminates a memory. Cal leaned forward an inch, without meaning to. In his chest, something like a worry ticked, and then stepped down a rung to curiosity. He heard the softest hat-on-peg sound in his cab. No kidding. It was that domestic, that little thup of something light and purposeful, finding a place to rest. His eyes cut to the passenger seat. Nothing. His coat lay exactly as he'd thrown it. The green LED on the dash flicked its small, steady heartbeat. The reefer carried on. He turned the CB on and left the squelch low. Channel 19 offered nothing but the wash of the night. Out of reflex. He nudged the knob to 13, then 12, then down to 9 old habits inherited from older drivers who liked certain channels for certain kinds of weather. Static, braided with static. On 9, in the low hiss, a voice cut in the way voices do when the bandwidth is reluctant. Clear to foul main on 3, blue flag set, hold your shove. The words were the language of the yard, not of the road. Blue flag. Cal knew that phrase vaguely. In railroad work, a blue flag or light means protection is set. You don't move rolling stock past a blue flag. People are working on equipment, under it, between it. A blue flag is a promise that lives should not depend on someone's attention span. He'd learned that at a diner counter once, from a man who smelled like oil and wind. The voice went away. The bells continued. A breeze threaded the elevator bins and made a music of their seams. The light in the tower burned. He could see, if he squinted, the shape of a person passing in front of the window, only a shape, maybe the addition of a hat brim, the outline of a shoulder, nothing to haunt, only something to consider. The outline paused, then stepped out of the window's frame and did not return. Copy. 3. Another voice said on 9. This one softer, older. Maintain blue. We have road traffic waiting at County 12. Let's not startle them with a cut made by committee. Cal smiled without humor. He hadn't expected to be included in the pronoun them. He didn't mind it. It made him feel like a benign piece of the plan. Out beyond the yard, a headlight finally showed itself, a white point low and distant to the north, a freight easing across the flat. Its horn sounded. 2 longs, 1 short, 1 long. The crossing's bells didn't change their mind about their own job. The gate stayed put, doing what gates do. The headlight grew and then hesitated at a signal he couldn't see. Someplace outside the world his eyes were granted. The horn came again, placid, a statement of existence. The train did not commit. A blue light bloomed to his right, at the very edge of his lane, where the crossing panel met the asphalt. It was small, a lens the size of a thumb, set on a short staff in the ballast where you'd never notice it in daylight. Blue, steady, more suggestion than glare. He saw it and felt the hair along his forearms rise in a way that was not fear. It was the body's way of saying, pay attention because someone else is paying attention to you. He heard a shoe scuff on frozen aggregate, and very calmly, the sound of a lantern's metal bail touching a gloved hand. He looked over his hood, and there, beneath the cantilever, a person stood half in shadow and half in the red blink of the signals, wearing the long coat of a railroad man who had learned to dress for a lifetime of night work. The lantern was an old-style glass globe, metal cap, the light inside a small, practical sundae. The person lifted the lantern to shoulder height and made a deliberate motion with it. A neat circle, and then a hold. A signal you could read without translation. Wait. Then the light tipped twice, the kind of tilt you use to say, thank you. The brim of the hat made a familiar silhouette without giving away a face. Cal's throat went dry in the way it does when you realize how much your attention has narrowed. He swallowed and rested his wrists on top of the wheel, as if to tell the truck, "Easy." He did not wave. He kept his body quiet. The way you do when a deer stands at the edge of your yard and you prefer to let it decide to be brave or not, on its own schedule. On the CB, the older voice murmured again, directed to someone not him. "Hold that. I have County 12 covered. Blue is displayed. Do not foul." It sounded like instructions delivered at a pace a person could obey without resenting. On the phone in Cal's palm, a text appeared without a chime, unknown number, a single line. "Please remain at the crossing. Crew on track. Thank you." He didn't like that his eyes believed it instantly, but they did. He turned the phone face down again and let the dashlight be the only artificial star in the cab. Inside the yard, something moved on silent rails. Shapes rose and settled. A boxcar door tapped. The horn out on the main stayed patient. The blue lamp by his lane burned quiet, casting no beam, only announcing and deflecting the idea of motion. A memory slipped up from a story he'd been told. Blue flags clamped to the rail. Blue lights hang on them at night. A foreman sets them. Only the person who placed the flag can remove it. It is a law made out of the kind of common sense that doesn't often make the news because no one gets harmed where it's honored. The lantern motioned once more. Not a circle this time. A straight lift and an ease down. Hold. Cal breathed, and did. His truck's heater made its small, constant exhale. The reefer kept time. His thoughts slowed to match the signals. Red, red, red. Beyond them, the elevator's light sighed its red blink over the bins. The headlight down the line brightened for a second, then dimmed. The horn spoke once more, and then fell back to its own breath. He had the odd feeling that two sets of professionals were telling each other old jokes in a language that had grown out of caution. The older voice on 9 came over the little hiss like someone talking from a room away. "Blue down on 3. Clear of movement. Stand by." Cal glanced to the little lamp by his tire. It went dark as neatly as it had appeared. The gates did not lift in the same breath. The bells persisted a few beats longer, the machinery insisting on its own checklists the way it should. Then the signals fell quiet. The arms began to raise with that same careful dignity. The bells took their last few notes and went to bed. The lantern under the cantilever dipped once in a grateful arc, the kind of acknowledgement that makes you feel you've done something noble by simply not doing anything reckless. The figure stepped backward and became a far tidier shape in the absence of red. The yard light in the tower snapped off as if someone had found the pull chain. Night closed the window like a curtain. Cal released the brake and let the truck roll at the speed of a considerate person leaving a library. He cleared the rails with more margin than he needed because he enjoyed the feeling of being sure. On the far side, he checked both mirrors out of custom. In the right glass, he caught a small blue reflection where there had been none before. A square of metal tucked into his passenger door handle, no bigger than a driver's license, painted the same loyal shade. He slowed to the shoulder and set his 4 ways in the tender neighborly way you do on late roads. He stepped out, breath condensing in front of his mouth like a new animal. The tag in his hand was cold and light. A hole, punched near one end, suggested it had once hung from something. The white letters painted on were stenciled carefully and a little crooked. "Do not move equipment men at work." The back bore a thumb-smudged signature. "Yard. Third trick." Beneath it, in smaller script, a name. K.R. Latham. He turned it over in his glove, then set it back where he'd found it, under the handle for 1 minute without moving. An old-fashioned way of saying, "I got the message." Then he tucked it into the pocket in his door where maps and receipts live because it felt wrong to leave it for wind. The mainline headlight brightened. Far back at a signal, someone received permission and took it. The horn lifted itself into the night, in the careful pattern of rules followed. Cal climbed back into his seat and eased onward across the highway's black seam. The elevator blinked another, patient red. The sign for the diner beyond the grain bins promised breakfast and pie and coffee that knew it was supposed to be strong. He took the diner out of nothing but respect for ritual. The counter was half lit. The coffee machine breathed a friendly sound. A woman with a pencil behind her ear poured him a cup. On the wall above the register hung black and white photos of the yard in its busy years, strings of cars rolling over the hump, men in caps leaning into work, a tower with windows open to summer. A corkboard held announcements: church supper, winter coat drive, a charity auction for a family with a medical bill that had been lucky and expensive. Taped to the board with blue tape, because of course it was, a card read in careful letters: Blue flag rule, do not move equipment, workmen protected. Beside it, a printed paragraph explained the rule to people who might need explanations. Someone had underlined with a ruler the sentence, "Only the person who placed the protection may remove it." "Cold out?" the woman asked without looking up, as if she were checking in on a houseplant. Cal nodded. "Crossing was down," he said. "Y'all get that much?" "Often enough," she said. "They've been replacing wire piece by piece since before my kid's first birthday. He's old enough now to borrow my car and not ask." She topped his cup. "My dad worked that third trick in the tower. He said the crossings have moods. He said if you talk to them nice and wait when they want you to wait, they'll do you the same favor when your day goes wrong." Cal glanced at the photo of the tower crew. A man with a jaw like a tackle box stood at the edge of the group with a lantern hooked to his fingers. The little white label beneath read, "Third Trick Winter Crew 1991, K.R. Latham, far left." The initials fluttered through him and settled in a place that didn't need proof. He finished his cup, left a tip that felt like another kind of thank you, and rolled back into the night with the sense that he would have driven more poorly if he had not been required to pause. The road past Eden Point went back to being a line across a muted world. He watched for deer without needing to see any. He kept his speed where it belonged. Along the horizon, the red blink of the elevator softened into the general grammar of the dark. On the far side of morning, a scale-side inspection pulled him in. The trooper checked paperwork, polite enough to respect the hour. He spotted the blue tag in the door pocket and lifted his chin at it with a tiny smile. "Yard man?" he asked. "Found it," Cal said. He didn't know how to make that sentence a true thing without sounding like a person who needed a story to make sense of his face. The trooper nodded. "Keep it," he said. "My grandfather kept one. Said it reminded him not to hurry on other people's time." Later that week, the blue tag stayed in the pocket where maps go to forget they were printed. Sometimes it slid enough to tap the plastic when the truck rolled over a joints. The sound was faint, honest. On another night, on a different two-lane near a different yard where corn makes rivers and rivers make fog, Cal saw a gate drop a hair ahead of reason and heard a voice on 9 remind someone he could not see to keep the blue displayed. He felt the old, simple relief of system speaking, of jobs done by people who deserve to be believed. Years after, the Eden Point Tower finally came down. They posted a crane's photo on the diner corkboard with a little caption that read, "Thank you, third trick." Someone tucked a small piece of blue glass behind the pushpin, like an offering. Trucks still stop at the crossing out of habit when the arms lower, even when they know how empty the line usually is. Sometimes the bells seem to ring a fraction slower, and sometimes a lantern appears where lanterns aren't much used anymore, and a hand lifts it in the ancient language that says, "Wait." Cal waits. He has learned it is a compliment to be worth waiting with. And that's where tonight's drive ends. 9 true trucker horror stories from the endless highways that never sleep. Out there, beyond the reach of your headlights, the road still hums with things unseen and unheard. If these stories kept you awake, give this video a like. It helps us keep the engine running through the night. And if you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt so you never miss another journey into the dark. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road, your doors locked, and your heart steady. Good night, and safe travels wherever the miles may take you.